G'day podcasters, welcome back to Season 6 of True Blue Conversations with your host Adam Bloom, the author of Easy Target, now available at adambloom.com.au. 8 years ago, after returning from 3 tours of Afghanistan and then gaining experience and education in financial planning, Warren Loudon teamed up with fellow veteran Dave Vaughan and started Loudon and Vaughan Private Wealth, founded with the underlying belief that every person matters and every dollar counts, providing comprehensive tailored financial advice and wealth management services for you and your family. Loudon and Vaughan will guide you towards your financial goals with integrity and transparency. Whether you're planning for retirement, investing for the future, or managing your family's wealth, they've got you covered. Visit loudonandvaughan.com.au or call 02 9538 2704 to book a meeting with Warren today.
G'day, welcome back to True Blue Conversations. Today, I'm coming to you live from Brisbane and I'm joined by a really good friend of mine who has got a story that ties back into episode 100 with Craig Hamburger and the Operation DA Nile in 2006 in Afghanistan. And it was a hectic story from the ground. Kev's going to tell it from the air. And we're going to go right through his career. He served for 20 years in both the Black Hawks and Chinook, and got out now and he's doing amazing things in the mental health space for veterans, first responders, and just people who are struggling with mental health. And it's an absolute honour to have him on the podcast. So Kevin Humphreys, DSC, welcome to the podcast, mate.
Thanks, Adam. Great to be here, buddy.
Mate, it's been a while to get this in and get this up and running, but we're finally here, mate. And Kev, before we get into your career and that story, can you tell us about you as a kid and growing up and what we like at school, and do you have any brothers and sisters?
Yeah. So I grew up in Katoomba in New South Wales.
Blue Mountains, mate. Yep.
You know the place well.
I do, yes.
And I was just a very, very average kid. You know, working class parents. Dad was a butcher, mum was an accounts clerk. Went to public schools, and I was number 3 in a line of 4. Eldest was a girl, and then 3 boys. And yeah, I was just a very average kid. Nothing really exciting, nothing, really terrible. It was just a pretty average kind of working class.
Good childhood.
Life. It was a good childhood, mate. We, mum and dad had an acre of land and, run around the backyard as a little kid playing cowboys and Indians or pretend armies and wars and all that kind of stuff, which I loved to do as a little kid. And there was also enough room there for a cricket pitch, so we used to mow the cricket pitch and belt a ball and occasionally
the old Hills hoist. Did you have the Hills hoist?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Hills hoist, and that used to get a workout, buddy spinning around on it and that kind of stuff. So really, it was a really good childhood. We didn't have any trimmings, but I can't remember really wanting for anything either, But
life was, from what my dad and mum said, and was more simple back then. We've overcomplicated things now.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, my man, as I said, he was a butcher and he had this panel van, as a delivery truck, and each Sunday was BMX, right? So we're in the BMX club, and we'd load up 4 kids plus 4 BMX bikes in the back of this panel van, right? Yeah, right. And so we'd all be in the back, of course, no seatbelts, no seats, no anything else. and a couple of the hills around Katoomba, I'm sure a couple of them were nowhere near the direction of where we needed to go to get to the BMX track, but they were a hoot. And he knew, because he could hear us all whooping and carrying on in the back as he flies down over a couple of humps, and we all get airborne, in the back of the van. Yeah, just, good days. Good days.
And school, you were pretty good at school?
Yeah, I was okay. Again, I wasn't an A student, but I was a solid B, and did well in a couple of subjects, did horribly in a couple of others like English and whatnot.
I think, mate, from all the episodes I've done, most veterans and first are the same. They didn't do good at school and adventurous, outdoory, but the teachers didn't know how to deal with that type of person, but then they found their straps later on in life, which you certainly did.
Yeah.
And you would have been the same, I'm guessing?
Yeah. You know, I knew when I was, I don't know, 6, 7 years old that I wanted to join the army. I still remember seeing, watching the TV and seeing an ad with army guys in greens going through the bush and then marching along and whatever else. It's like I want to go and do that. Whatever that is, that looks all right. And then where we lived in Katoomba, Melrose Park was...
Yep, I know Melrose.
Yeah, I thought you might.
Yep.
Was just a couple of streets up. And with the prevailing conditions, the rescue choppers used to fly over our house to come into land there, whether they were doing hospital transfers or refuels for lost bushwalkers or whatever. And I remember, as a pimply-faced teenager out in the backyard, just watching these things, mesmerised by them. And then, and then jump on the treadly and race up to the park so I could stand, 200 metres away and gawk at it and go, wow. And just go, man, how do I do that? And then in year 11, I found out the Army had helicopters. They just transferred from the Air Force. And I was like, oh my God, all my Christmases have come at once. This is amazing. So I was like, that's what I'm going to do.
So did you have any relatives that had served before you, or were you the first?
So my grandfather was actually a cook in the 2nd, 3rd Machine Gun Battalion in Papua New Guinea.
Yeah, right.
And so that's, as far as our lineage goes, that's it.
Yeah, right.
Until we got to my generation. So I'm one of 4, 3 boys in that litter. And older brother joined the Air Force as an airborne electronics analyst in P3s. Me as a pilot in the Army, and my younger brother ended up joining as infantry soldier and then became a loadmaster.
Oh, right.
Our cousins, so my dad's brother, his sons, they had 4, 2 girls, 2 boys. And the 2 boys also joined the military, one in the Air Force as a refueler, and he's still serving as a C-17 loadmaster. And the other fella went into the Army as a handler and retired as a Y1.
Yeah, right.
So no lineage, but then in our generation, all 5 males all joined the military.
What do you put that
down to? And all connected to aviation.
Yeah, what do you put that down to, mate?
No idea. Yeah, seriously, no idea.
Because most veterans I talk to, either their grandfather, father, or it's very rare that they're the first one, and then a whole string of cousins, brothers, and it's really strange.
Yeah. And my brother really wanted to be in the Air Force, so he went into Air League, and I followed him into Air League, and I loved flying, but the whole blue uniform thing didn't work with me. But no, I just really wanted to be in the Army and to fly. And so, so I went across the cadets. He kept going with their training corps and all kinds of stuff. Yeah, so it was just, he and I were absolutely focused. And I can't speak for the others simply because I don't know. But of note, in 2003, the deployment for Iraq, myself, my younger brother as a loadmaster, and my cousin as a aircrewman handler were all in the same unit, all deployed in just outside of Iraq together at the same time.
Gee, so both families would have been like, God, I hope nothing happens to the boys. Like, that's unusual, mate, that you're all in the same
very much so. But none of us. When I realised this is what was happening, I went to the boss and said, "Hey, listen, I don't know if you know, you got 2 brothers and a cousin, all same surname, all in the same unit of 100. You sure you want to do this?" And anyway, I sat down, had a chat, realised there was no chain of command conflicts, blah blah blah, and basically there was no policy to say we couldn't. Yeah, right. And we all had a chat, and do you still want to? Yep. All right, job's on.
Well, that's right. I mean, if you've got a chance to serve your country, you're going to drive.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know that sounds selfish, but mate, that's what you join for. You don't join to sit on the sidelines.
None of us were going to say no, right?
Exactly.
And to be able to do it with your kin makes it even better.
100%, exactly right. And so you joined the Army in 1991.
Yep.
What's the process back then? Because internet's not around. So do you call up 1901 or how did you join up?
So Yellow Pages, school careers.
Yep.
Bookcase and all that kind of stuff. And then wait for the career advice for the ADF recruiting team to come to town, right, in Katoomba. So it was twice a year they'd come up. And I remember it very, very vividly, standing there like I was first in line. It's like, I'm doing this, I'm first in line, and gets there and he answers a few questions. He goes, you're doing pretty good with your marks, and why don't you go to ADFA instead of Duntroon? And I was like, nah, I'm done with school. I got no interest in any more school. I just want to get on with it. And he's like, yeah, okay, but we'd like you to go to ADFA. I said, no, don't care. I don't want to go to ADFA. And in hindsight, I really should have gone to ADFA. But it also would have completely changed the trajectory of everything else that happened. So, we are where we are and it's perfect. So that's it. But I was just going to say with the with the recruiter, he looked me up and down and said, how heavy are you? And I said, I wouldn't have a clue. And he said, how tall are you? I said, I wouldn't have a clue. And it's like, okay. So I did it, 6'1". I said, right, you can be no more than 84 kilos.
Yeah, right.
Right, okay. And he said, you might want to weigh yourself. Oh, bloody hell. So I went up to my old man's butcher shop and jumped up on the scales, and the needle just kept rocketing past 80, past 90, ting, at 102. And it's like, holy crap, I'm fat. Wow, I better do something about this, because I had 6 weeks, I think, until I had to be down at, recruiting wherever it was in Sydney for the initial medical. And anyway, long story short, I just starved myself and ran and clocked in at 84 kilos in 6 weeks.
Wow, so, mate, that's... I know there's fasting, but that's...
it was crazy. It's not recommended by the dietitian, put it that way.
So what happens next? So you sign on the dotted line, and do you go to Kapooka or do you go to RMC?
No, so I go to RMC.
Yep.
And so in those days, it's changed recently, but in those days it was 18 months in 3 6-month classes.
Yep.
Third class, then second, then first. And so I joined in January 91. And
were you 17 at that point?
I was 18.
18.
Yeah, so in New South Wales we finished at 18.
Yep.
And so I was 18 and 3 months, 18 and 4 months.
Yep.
And one of the youngest there for sure. And
what was that like, going into the adult world of, from you're a kid in high school to then you're in an adult environment where the acting up and being immature doesn't really fly in that environment. How did you cope with that?
Mate, it was one of the most bizarre things. It was almost like I was living 2 lives at the same time. One life was, this is my best life, this is amazing, I'm in the army, I'm on track to do what I've wanted to do for over 10 years. And the other was a complete fish out of water, because as I said, I'm a working class kid, public school boy, and to go to Duntroon through what was then the Badge Gates, the Sandstone, the parade ground, the this, the that, and then there were quite a few cliques within the groups that were there. There were ex-servies who were bloody amazing, and there were lots of private school kids, lots of kids like me too. Don't worry, and it was a matter of trying to find your tribe. And that, I found that really hard while I was there, and there, it was just this 2-speed environment within the one body and the one mind, which I really found challenging at times, really challenging. The 18 months there, looking back, the 18 months was a blur, but I mean, I'm a fairly socially awkward kind of guy. I'm not the most naturally social person, and so I really struggled with the social aspect and with the, not so much with the adult piece. I think in a way I was fairly mature, but I was still naive.
Yep.
And that didn't do me any favours sometimes.
And for that, so you finish your 18 months, do you graduate as a lieutenant? Is that you come out, and in that RMC, and for our non-military listeners, it's Royal Military College Duntroon is down at Canberra, so that's where all officers go to do. So you're non-commissioned, and your other ranks go out to Kapooka in New South Wales, out near Wagga, and your officers go to Duntroon, and then they study at ADFA as well, which Kev didn't do, which was probably a blessing. So and so you finish that, mate. You come out, so you're 20 years old now.
19
Oh,
still.
19. Okay, so 19.
Graduated RMC at 19, but selected for pilot's course.
Wow.
So,
And talk to me that next part, because this is where you start to get to live your dream of, seeing those choppers flying at Melrose Park. How many started with you in that pilot's course and how many finished?
Yeah. It seemed like almost every person in my class at Duntroon wanted to be on pilot's course. So the initial list was enormous, but that gets whittled down pretty quickly and ended up being 10. 10 GSOs, so General Service Officer. So they're people who go through the long version of officer training, like I did with 18 months. And then there's SSOs, Specialist Service Officers, and they are people who join specifically to do a particular trade or job. Pilots have SSOs or had SSOs. I don't believe they have them at the moment. And then some other corps have them, like doctors and various other things. And so they do a shortened, like a 6-week, we call it a knife and fork course, learn how to use a knife and fork like an officer should. And then they go on and do their corps specific training. So we had 10 GSOs and 10 SSOs meet together at Point Cook to start our pilot's course together. Right. And that's typically how it went. And at that stage, it was a 70% failure rate.
Wow. So high attrition.
Absolutely. And true to form, of the 10 GSOs that started, only 3 of us made it through.
Wow.
And I can't remember the exact count on the SSO front. They did better than us. I think they had 5 that got through out of the 10, roughly speaking.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were bang on the average of only 3 got through.
So with that, are you learning a lot of aviation law, what you can, what you can't do? And then how quick are they putting you up in the air and starting to learn to fly?
Yeah. So it is accelerated. Anybody can learn to fly, right? Anybody can fly. The key difference with military flying is that you've got to be able to learn quickly and adapt every single flight. And I found out that I was a terrible fixed-wing pilot. and so they used the fixed-wing flying initially because it's a pretty cheap thing, and it's still basically the same today. But yeah, so we do fixed-wing flying. We have, I think we had a month or so of theory stuff before we got in the plane, right? And you do a bunch of stuff dry. Yep. The aircraft are still going through checks and procedures and whatnot. These days, of course, there's simulators and far more advanced technology than what we had. And
so they actually do it a lot easier now than what you...
Oh, I wouldn't say they do it easier, mate, because the aircraft that we were in was a CT4 air trainer and affectionately known as the Parrot. And the 2 pilots sat side by side, right? It was a fixed undercarriage doing 120 knots and your ceiling was 10,000 feet, so it wasn't pressurised.
Yeah, right.
The boys and girls doing it today are in a tandem cockpit, front, back. They're doing 240 plus knots and it's pressurised with a retractable undercarriage.
Yeah, right.
And it's all glass, instrumentation. So just because they got simulators now, I do not believe they're doing it easier. I firmly believe if 19-year-old Kev was thrown into that, I don't know if he'd make it through.
Yeah, okay.
Right? I'll give them my dues. I don't know if I'd get through in the current environment. And part of the reason I say that is because like I said, I was a terrible fixed-wing pilot. I just couldn't land straight for a number of reasons, as I worked out later. But I finished second last on my course. And a good mate of mine who also made it through all the way to the end, he was dead last on the course. Right?
Yeah, right.
And anyway, we were the very, very last course to go through Point Cook. And anyway, there's a story of cutting down a sight board in the middle of the night and getting that to the hangar bash and all kinds of stuff. It's all good fun. But a couple of the instructors came over to us at the end and he said there'd been a few truth serums by this stage. And he goes, Humphreys, you really shouldn't be here. And I was like, why? And he said, because we ended up giving a little bit more time for you than otherwise would have got, because there were no Air Force and Navy courses because they'd all finished and we were the last course but still had all the resources. So they were able to pump some extra time into us. And he said, but the reason we did it was because you never, ever quit. You just never, no matter what we threw at you, no matter what happened, you always said, yep, give me another go. Yep, I'll do it. And you did. And so the reason you two got through was because you never, ever, ever gave up. What happens when you leave here, we can't do anything about that anymore. So, I've never ever forgotten that grace, that empathy, that compassion shown to me by those guys.
And I think it's something that we've touched on before we hit record is, mate, you've got the work ethic that you have. I see what you do now, and the work ethic that you have now, that's come from it's come from your mum and dad. It's come right through, and we were talking about empathy and, having that, being grateful, and you worked hard, but you had that lucky break, and sometimes that's all it is that lucky break that then carried you through for the rest of your career.
Absolutely, mate. If I had an instructor who, dare I say it, was a lot like me, going back then, I can say I'm a different guy now in many ways, but if I can look back then and be totally honest with myself, I don't know that I would have given the guy a break, right? And what's really interesting about that is because, we'll talk about it more, but I think I went on and had a decent aviation career. I ended up duxing the course on Black Hawks, and then did some other things after that. And the other guy who finished dead last on that course ended up retiring as a full colonel, as the commandant of the training centre, right? So, there must have been something there.
Yeah, 100%.
There must have been something. And so it taught me a lot of lessons that, to be honest though, I only saw in hindsight.
And it's, as you say, a good point you touch on, and looking back now as the years have gone on, hindsight is a wonderful thing. Of certain things you go, oh, if I had seen that then, and now I would have acted a little bit different. But hindsight, as we say, is, and I think it comes with maturity as well, because at that stage, you're still 20?
So that was 19. I just turned 20.
Yeah, most 20-year-olds, mate, they're not fully developed till late 20s. So
that's exactly right. My youngest is 20 at the moment, and I can see him still maturing. He's a fantastic young man. I can see there's still things. He's still maturing, right?
100%.
And I think he's a lot smarter than me, so God knows what I was like.
So, mate, you graduate. What was the feeling like? Do you get because you're the first. I've had a load master on, so Rod Henderson, good mate. Yep. I've never actually had a pilot on, so do you
we're all much better looking than load masters.
I know Rod, he'll agree with that. So, but do you have like a passing out parade, and do the family come, or is it just, right, you're a pilot now, off you go to your squadron?
It varied a bit. I don't know what the current procedure is. At the time, it was one of the coolest things where we actually got to do our own fly past.
Oh man!
It was just unbelievable. So we out on parade, did the whole parade, saluting, swords, blah blah blah, and then march away, get changed quickly, and then march out to the aircraft to then jump in the helicopters, start up, depart, and come back in formation over the top.
Oh, man.
It was mind-blowing. Yeah. It was just so awesome to be able to do your own fly past.
That's awesome.
Oh, I still get goosebumps just thinking about it.
I can see it,
It was just fantastic, yeah.
And is that where you knew you were home and the love of flying? That's where it really started? And you're living your boyhood dream of, hey, that was pretty cool watching those choppers land on Melrose Park. Fast forward a few years, I now actually get to do that.
Yeah. The moment that it first hit me that, holy crap, this is happening, was actually my very first flight in a helicopter when I was sitting in the back and we lifted off to Alva. Just straight up. It was like, this is so cool. This is it.
I know what it's like. It's cool. Like, you go up, and from my work, I winch in and out to to fires and remote areas, and it is cool, mate. Like, I have to say, you go up in the air and you go, this is, and I have the utmost respect for you guys, mate, because when you're holding in a hover, holy shit, it is, you're watching just that, and I'd sit there and just to winch in and out and watching just the control that you guys have from someone who's on the end of the winch cable. Thank you, mate. I'm glad you guys, because that takes a lot of skill. Oh,
it does, absolutely. And and you progress. Hovering, when you first start hovering, you can't keep it within a couple of football fields, right? You're just all over the shop. It's hilarious. And some people get it faster than other people, but at some stage, the hover fairy, as it's known, the hover fairy comes and taps you on the shoulder. You don't know it's coming, just at some stage, you get this little dink, and all of a sudden, you're hovering, and you're still. And it's like, wow. And you may not be perfect, but you're pretty close. And it's like, what happened?
Time in the machine.
Just time in the machine, getting a feel for it and realising that when you're thinking about it, you're already too slow.
Yep.
You have to do it without thought when you're hovering, and particularly when you're really doing it with finesse.
And I know that, mate, because I come from an earth-moving background, and when I first got on machines, I was terrible. But then time in a machine, hours, day after day, week after week, month after month. Eventually, you start doing things, and you go, "How did I do that? Like, I couldn't do that 6 months ago." One, as you say, just one day, just everything clicks, and it's all feel. It's all, and so you do you pass out, and you get posted to 5th Aviation Regiment, and I'll talk about the incident in '96 that happened a little bit later on in the podcast, but you get there, and what was that like, mate, to get to 5th Ave and you start flying your Black Hawks, and because back then, what was the capability of 5th Ave back then when you first got there?
Yeah, mate. 5 Ave was full on, and so there were 2 squadrons of Black Hawks, a troop of Hueys in AFS, Aerial Fire Support configuration, and when I first got there, they had a deployment to... So I got there then in '93. They just had a deployment to Cambodia for UN, and it just... 5 Avon was just on the go for something in the near region. Cambodia was the furthest afield at that stage, but they were on the go for something in the near region. They were either preparing to go or actually going. Like every week. The counter-terrorism role was being shared. It was a regimental task, and it was being shared between the squadrons at that stage. And so you had this other overarching requirement, as well as then these other troop or squadron level commitments that came up for various places around. We'd do training in Papua New Guinea for high altitude training. We also went across, so about 8 months after I got there, we went across to Cape Levesque at the top of Western Australia to do. We were there for a couple of weeks. So we were one troop, A squadron, and we went across there and exercised with A troop, 1 squadron, SAS, and so it was a green rolls, fully immersed green rolls thing, complete with down aircrew drills and all kinds of stuff, and it was just huge. And I didn't know anybody at the regiment at that stage anyway who wasn't living their best life, like working hard, working like a dog, working really hard, long hours, lots of days, back from one exercise, reboot, go on the next exercise, back from one deployment or training trip or whatever it was, and reboot, or a night flying period of a couple of weeks or whatever else, and it was go, and if there's the phrase, leaning forward, of looking for the next thing to come and preparing for it and working on it and blah, blah, blah. The unit was about 600 people or so, including contractors and whatnot. And if you can imagine it, the whole 600 people were leaning forward.
Yeah, wow.
And now, what was one of the downsides of that was that, not necessarily when I first got there, but certainly mid-late 90s, 5 Avon had the dubious honour of being second for the highest number of divorces across the army, right, in a unit. Guess which unit was first? SASR. And, so already in the mid-90s, before the craziness of Middle East kicked off, SASR and then 5 Avon, first and second on the list for number of divorces, right? So leaning hard, leaning forward, going hard, comes at a cost.
And for our non-military listeners, mate, I'll say that when Kev joined, as he alluded to just then, Kev joined in a peacetime. There wasn't many deployments on the horizon. That ramped up after 9/11, where the next 20 years was just flat out insane. So Kev touches on a very good point there, that yeah, so divorces were happening. There's a lot more coming down the track in what was going to come. But for you, like obviously you're early 20s, you're living your best life, you're learning, you're flying. Was there any talk of any deployments at that stage, or was it still just in that early training, like learning more new capabilities and all that sort of thing?
Yeah. So there were a couple of them. So Bougainville, I can't remember the year that Bougainville happened, but a troop or so of Black Hawks went across to Bougainville. 97, 98, we had humanitarian relief up in...
Which we'll talk about that,
in PNG.
Yep.
There was another deployment as well, again in the Southwest Pacific kind of region. But, you know, we were planning for 3, 4, 5 different operations a year.
Yeah, right.
That only for whatever reason didn't happen, right? So, so there was always, if not every day, most weeks of the year, 4 weeks out of 5, you were planning for something somewhere.
Yeah, right. And so in 1995, so you got there, cut your teeth. In 1995, you went on a training exercise to the US. What was that like, mate? And what did you learn from the guys over there that you could bring back and teach and pass on back in the squadron?
January 1995, I got married to my bride. And then 4 months later, I was off to the US for 4 or 5 months.
Love you, darlings.
Yeah, it's exactly right. Welcome to the army. So that was actually the transition across to Chinook.
Yeah, right, okay.
So I'd been on Black Hawk and I got approached to say, listen, we're bringing the Chinooks back into the ADF. They're coming to the army because all battlefield helicopters are in the army now. And we need to look at building the lineage for commanders and whatnot. So are you interested? I'd never thought about flying Chinook at all, and I loved flying the Black Hawk. But it was like, 2 rotors got to be better than 1. Let me at it, right? And so anyway, so I jumped at that, went over there, did the course at Fort Rucker, as it was known. It's now known as Fort Novacell. And that introduced me to the US training system, which is very different to ours. And, you know, I'll be honest and say that when I was there, I thought it was inferior to ours. The reality of it is that there's nothing good or bad, right or wrong. It's just different, right? For their scale and the way their crew development works, that's what works for them, right? In the ADF, we have a training system that works for us, and the two are different. Now, 23-year-old head, as we were talking about before, hadn't fully matured at that stage, right? So, you know, I didn't, to be honest, didn't see it for what it was. But yeah, it's a full-on machine, the training machine over there.
Yeah, right.
But flew with some incredible instructors who, you know, had flown Chinooks in Vietnam and this kind of stuff. And they were still there as you know, 60-something-year-olds, bloody just amazing guys. And so did the Chinook course and then came home.
So is that, because I know some people and non-military listeners who they say the Black Hawks, mate. Black Hawks are fast. They're manoeuvrable. You can do. Chinooks are a big elephant, and I'll say that. And as in Afghanistan, the Taliban used to say, "Oh, the elephants are coming," and they're slow. Did you find it hard to transition from the Black Hawk to the Chinook? And because I've never flown a Chinook, mate. I've never flown a Black Hawk, but they're two different machines. Is the Chinook as movable? Well, it's not as movable as a Black Hawk, but you can do things in it that you can't do in a Black Hawk. But did you enjoy flying both and the challenge of the difference?
Oh yeah, mate, absolutely. I loved flying both. The Chinook is my hands down favourite.
Oh, okay.
And the Chinook is as manoeuvrable as a Black Hawk.
Really?
Believe it or not. Now, because it's kind of hard to describe, but basically every helicopter eventually runs out of power, right? Every helicopter runs out of space to fill it. And when you fill it to the gunnels, the Black Hawk was unaffectionately known as the pig. Right?
Oh, right.
When it's absolutely full.
Yep.
Because our engines that we had at the time and whatever else, they were not great performing engines. They performed to the book spec, don't get me wrong, but, you know, that didn't leave you much. And you know, my first ever time flying operational contingency loading where we're loading 15 guys in the back, no seats, all the rest of it. So we weren't allowed to do it in Australia because it was too dangerous. So we wait until we're in a war zone to then do it when everything's happening for real.
Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And so the first time I ever flew it, I was number 3 in a chalk of 4 coming out of a refuelling pad, and we all lifted at the same time, and it was fairly close. But anyway, I was copping downwash from number 2, and because the relative position I was copping extra downwash from number 2. It's like 35 degrees and humidity at 90%, all this kind of stuff. And I almost pancaked it back into the FARP in front of us.
Wow.
Right? And because I didn't anticipate the downwash and I didn't anticipate a few things. And anyway, just managed to scrape it out, limp it out over the top. It was like, holy crap, that was a learning experience. But the Chinook in Afghanistan, dare I say it, no matter how much we loaded that thing up, it just kept on. It was, if you could imagine an aircraft could shrug its shoulders and look at you over its shoulder and go, yeah, you got anything else for me? Right? That's what the Chinook was like.
Right.
But yeah, when they're empty, both aircraft are quite manoeuvrable. The Chinook is not really aerodynamic. I say it's a block of flats with rotors, right? Or a school bus, whatever you want to call it. And it's not uncommon when you're doing flying it with the automatic flight control system off, particularly in the training environment over at Fort Rucker, where you go into a turn, the student gets it out of balance, and the thing does a flat 360 while you're doing 80 knots, right? So you can turn it at the same rate that you can turn a Black Hawk, all this kind of stuff, which we a couple of times did. Just depends on the thing. The Brits have they throw their machines around a lot. Anyway, it's a lot of talk to say. Love the Black Hawk, but the Chinook is my favourite.
Right.
And it is, it's just bloody awesome.
Well, it's funny you say that, mate, because I've had a good friend of mine, British friend, who Hendo actually just caught up with in the UK, Liz McConney, and and she's become a really both previous guests on the podcast. And she just said there's nothing better than that sound of the Chinook starting up, and she still gets chills when they fly over now, and she misses what she, and going by her book, it's an absolute ripper of a book, and Chinook crew chick. So longest,
I've read that one.
Longest serving British. She is of 18 years as Chinook crew chick, Loadmaster, and just unbelievable story. And go back and listen to her podcast and Hendo's as well. So really good episodes. But mate, it's great to have you on and talk about. And that's what I mean. Most people would think that a Chinook is an elephant, slow, not like, and indeed, I'm not sure of the current model Black Hawks that are just coming back into service. But in my day, the Chinook and the Black Hawk, the Chinook was faster. Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. And we had 3 hooks and we had 30 seats. We're 3 times better. No.
You can say that because
I can say that because
you piloted both.
Yeah, I can say that because I've flown both, mate. But each had their own role, and and so much so when it came to Afghanistan. Yes, I was the Chinook OC, but I was advocating for Black Hawks to be there with us, to have a combine a troop of Black Hawks and a troop of CH-47. Because they each have their niche, right? Putting a Chinook up when you need it to do something for 3 people, like, what a waste of the asset, right? But anyway, there's 100 reasons why it didn't happen. But yeah.
Fog of war, mate. Fog of war. There's certain things that I look at with that of, we could talk about that, mate, if we go on forever, of going from night patrols to day patrols of, that's sort of limiting your capability of what you can do and putting the guys in more harm. But anyway, that's But fog of war's and as you say, you were advocating for, because they've both got their different roles and exactly. So, but mate, I want to go back to as I mentioned, in June 1996, 2 Black Hawks collided in a training accident where 18 people were killed, and you served alongside these guys in 5th Ave, and so it was SAS and 5th Ave guys that were killed. Mate, how did that affect you personally?
Yeah, mate. Kel Hales, John Berrigan and Mick Baker, 2 pilots and Loadmaster. And, every now and then, and right now is one of them. Right, I still tear up about it. Right?
Yeah, take your time, mate.
And, so Kel was about 12 months ahead of me on pilot's course. JB was about 12 months behind, I think. And if I hadn't of transitioned across to Chinook, I firmly believe I would have been flying that night. And in which aircraft and all the rest, I have no idea. But it absolutely would have been on the cards. I'd been asked a couple of times to go across, and it's like, no, I'm going to Chinook. So absolutely impacted me. My wife and I just finished our pack of our house to go over the States for a Chinook instructor's course that day. And so we were down the Strand, walking down the Strand to get a bite to eat, and I heard a noise of a Black Hawk, and it's like, that's weird. Like, they're meant to be up on the range tonight. I knew the program. And it's like, okay, who knows? And then I realised it was 2 aircraft, and then I realised it was 3. It's like, shit, something's gone really badly wrong. And by this stage, I could also see they were heading for the hospital. It's like, shit. So I bolted for the Queen's Park next to the hospital, which was the landing pad at the time. And as I got there, the first aircraft was already on the ground and was unloading stretchers. A couple of ambulances there. Second aircraft was just landing and starting to unload. And then the third aircraft was on approach. And it's the most horrible feeling to be standing there and just completely helpless, that there's nothing you can do to help at that stage. And so, as the different stretchers and whatever else had gone past, and then one of the operators was coming back towards the aircraft, and I grabbed him and introduced myself, and I said, mate, what can I do to help? And he said, mate, two birds have collided. They're both down. There's fucking probably 20 people dead. There's ammo going off. It's fucking horrible, mate. And he said, just make sure the duty officer knows. And, in those days it was before mobile phones. And so I ran back to the hotel, jumped on the phone, and a good mate of mine who I had done the initial Chinook training with the year before, he was duty officer that night.
Yeah, right.
And I said, mate, do you know about the crash? He said, yeah, I'm all over it. So, all right. Anyway, I went back down the park, and then another couple of aircraft landed with more bodies and more people coming in. And that was the moment that it got really real. I'd had some other, incidents before that. I got a bird smashing the greenhouse window over my head and various other things while I've been flying, and a couple of other close-ish, scary-ish encounters. But that was the moment when it got real. And it's like, this training shit, this is real. And so anyway, the next day, start to hear little bits, snippets of what happened. And then I think it was 2 or 3 days later was the memorial service up there, and one of the most gut-wrenching days to stand there and to see 18 berets, 18 styres, 18 sets of boots, all there, and to know that 3 of them were guys that you used to, you'd see every day at work, you'd go out with on a Friday night, and they're gone. And it was bloody crazily sobering. And the next day we were on the plane to the States. And so what was really weird about that was that we jumped on a plane to the States still in mourning, and went over and had 15 months in the States. But we stopped in Melbourne and saw my family there briefly before we kept on the flight. And the first thing my mother said to me when we got off the plane in Melbourne was, another 2 Black Hawks have collided. And I almost collapsed. I was like, what? Another 2 Black Hawks have collided. She said, yeah. And I can't remember what she said, so many soldiers killed. And I was like, where? What was that? She said, over in America. I'm like, oh. And that was the moment when I realised that any loss of life, is tragic. But we absolutely have a special place for those who are closest to us, right? And the thought of having another two Black Hawks from 5 having had a mid-air within 4 days of the last one, oh my God. That it was in the States does not make it okay, but it somehow lessened the blow.
Oh, 100%.
But we came back to Townsville 15 months later, got off the plane, ready to grieve. Because like we'd left the whole city was grieving, and you could feel the pulse of the city of Townsville. The whole place had all, I won't say they'd almost
stopped,
but the whole place just was in suspended animation almost. Yeah, and so 15 months later, we came back and it was like, we want to grieve. But the whole place had moved on. There was a memorial in place and this and that, and, the whole city, the regiment, everybody had moved on. We'd missed the first anniversary, we were there 15 months later, and everyone had moved on. And so now we were trying to grieve with no one else around to grieve with. And so it was on so many different levels, it was a really hard-hitting experience.
Well, mate, I thank you for sharing that, because I know how hard it is, because and I had Dan Fortune on, and he shared with, he was over in the US himself at that time, and he knew those guys, and a lot of them went through the Rio cycle with him, and it was hard for him too, and it took the regiment a long time to recover from. There was hundreds of years of experience with all those operators on those birds, and for the 5th Ave guys as well. And for you, as you mentioned, that's where it got real. Is that where it changed? You changed then as a pilot, that you treated, not that you, and I know you, Kev, that you wouldn't treat training as, you don't muck around, because you know how dangerous flying is. But is that you just trained harder to not make those mistakes?
So, yes, and I'm a serious guy. I've always taken training, and I take everything seriously, to my detriment sometimes, but I take everything seriously. And the moment it got reinforced for me was actually when we were over at Cape Levesque, which was mid-94, so 2 years before that. And we, as I said, working with the SAS troop, doing the downed aircrew drills and all the rest of it. And we got our envelope passed forward to us. All right, this is the scenario. You've just been shot down, blah, blah, blah. And so we're legging it across the mangroves and up over the hill and mangroves and up over the next hill and whatever else to make it to our RV. And so we got there with time to spare and waiting. Night fell, and I can't remember the exact time, but anyway, the exact time came, and we could hear, but we couldn't see. We could hear something moving, but we couldn't see, because it was absolutely pitch black, and no RV. I was like, what the hell happened? Next morning came, radio in, we had to go and walk to a next point and then get winched out and hoisted out. The SAS patrol was there. We were 15 metres off the mark.
Yeah, right.
We were 15 metres off the mark. They saw us, but because we weren't on the mark, they did an RV with us. Now, I don't blame them for that, right? Now, in the real scenario, if we had downed aircrew and a patrol was out there to pick them up and they were 15 metres off, of course they'd say, hey, boys, you're with us. But in that training scenario, we were playing for keeps, right? And 15 metres was 15 metres. And 95% wasn't good enough, right? That's the moment that I learnt that 95% wasn't good enough. That's the moment that I learnt that 15 metres is still 15 metres. And what I didn't learn, unfortunately, was when to be able to discern when that 15 metres was absolutely critical. I took it very seriously and very personally that I missed that last 15 metres, and therefore I compromised the lives of my crew. I took it very seriously. And so from that point forward was when I doubled down on, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it right. And Yeah, and come then to 2 years later to the June 96 crash, it absolutely reinforced for me that if we're going to do it, we have to do it right. Otherwise, 18 lives.
And as like, I know most people think flying's safer than driving a car. So much can go wrong, and I know it myself. Every time I go up, mate, I'm chancing my life. Like, things can go wrong, and they can go wrong very quickly. And a lot of people just, and it's funny, mate, that years ago, before I started winching in and out of helicopters, I didn't pay attention to the flight brief in plane. Now, I watch exactly what they say. I do up the seat behind me because it's just practice now of what I do in the chopper, that I pay attention because I want to live. I don't want to die. And when you see people on their phones, and it's not until you're exposed to that dangerous environment that you actually pay attention to, because shit can go wrong very quickly. And as you know, you know it firsthand. So
absolutely.
Yeah, and that's, I want to get that point across to people, is actually watch what the cabin staff are doing, because it could save your life.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's one of my bugbears that I always see on a flight. I'm sure you see it too on flights.
All the time.
All the time. People don't pay attention. Oh, where's the exit? And then they're the ones that are screaming when shit's going wrong. And it's like, did you pay attention to where your exit is? Could be behind you, not in front of you. Like, anyway, it's
absolutely.
So you come back from that, and a really hard time for you, because, as you say, they've moved on, but you are still, you'd gone over to the US. You deploy, as you mentioned, in 97 on a humanitarian aid over to PNG.
Yep.
What was that like, and what was your role over there, and how long were you deployed for?
Yeah, so that was a number of short stints. So did, a month or so over in Kayunga, which is right over on the western area, just near the border with Irian Jaya. Hot as hell over there. My God, it was hot and sweaty. And then we did some time at Madang and some time at Moresby and whatever else. And so basically we'd have particularly when we're at Kayunga, we'd have a C-130 come in with some L pallets, the big pallets in the back there. And basically, if everything went smoothly, if everything went like clockwork, then the L pallets are loaded laterally. So like for those who aren't aware, L pallet is a rectangular alloy pallet that gets loaded on rollers in the back of different aircraft. And in a Hercules, it can go in so that its length is across the plane. And if everything went perfectly, they were loaded so that the forklift could take them off the C-130. We'd manually have to spin them 90 degrees, and then they get put on longitudinally onto the Chinook. And we could take 2 L pallets.
Yep.
But quite often what was happening was that they were loaded too high, or the wrong configuration, or whatever else. And so we invariably had to, by hand, pull apart these pallets and then put them back together again. So the pallets consisted of oil, flour and water. So 10 or 20 litre water containers, 10 or 20 litre oil, and typically 20 kilo sacks of rice and or flour, rice and flour. And anyway, so we... and so we would be carrying about 20 tonne.
Yeah, right.
Oh, sorry, not 20 tonne, 20,000 pounds, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So about 9 tonne, 8 tonne, 9 tonne of these supplies. And then we'd get out to a location. There's no forklift or anything out there, right? So, and there's only 3 to 4 crew on board the aircraft, 2 pilots and 1 or 2 crewmen. And anyway, and so we get there, and a number of times there was just a swarm of locals, and they're all starving, and they're wanting to help, right? And I found PNG people to be some of the most beautiful people on the planet, just wonderful people. And but noise, communication barriers, all the rest of it. And there were a couple of times you look down the back from the cockpit, and there's just this swarm, sea of faces and arms and legs and stuff going everywhere, and shit being thrown, and it's like, and just, yes, absolute swarming a couple of times. And so we typically, when we had a lot of locals support and we could sort of coordinate them, then both pilots would stay in the front, the crewmen would supervise and let the locals do a lot of the work. But there were times when there was literally no one around. There might be 2 or 3 people on the airstrip and that's it. And so we would have to manhandle between the 3 of us or the 4 of us. One pilot would stay at the controls, the other pilot would unstrap with a couple of crewmen down the back, and we'd unload 8 tonnes worth of 10 to 20 kilo bags and bottles and whatever else.
Yeah, right.
That's a long, long day.
100%. And so what had happened over there? Was it an earthquake or...?
No, it was just famine. They'd been in drought for months and months and months.
Yeah, right.
And so no crops, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, it got to the state where it was a famine declared, and so the Australian government helped.
So looking at all your deployments, and we'll get into, you deployed a lot over your space of your 20-year career. Is that although it was a different mission, it's humanitarian, is that one that you look back on very fondly compared to your war fighting in a sense?
Yeah, absolutely, mate. That's one of the occasions where you realise the other side of the Defence Force, right? You realise the other side of the Defence Force is to serve the people in a very direct fashion. I used to say to people that, when we're in Afghanistan, we're there because the politicians sent us, and we're fighting for the guy beside us. And it's cliche, but it's bloody true. And when you are in that environment, you're there, and the reason you're there is so that people can visit the State Library in Brisbane and look over the Brisbane River, right? Or so they can go to the beach on Christmas Day and eat their prawns, right? That's the reason they're in Afghanistan, to serve Australia and its national interests, right? And its national interests are those things that I just described. And obviously a whole lot more. What that deployment to PNG showed me was when we were directly supporting people, in this case, not Australian citizens, right? But it was still in Australia's national interest to support the people of PNG for a whole bunch of different reasons. And it was great to be able to have that direct contact with the PNG people, and to be able to serve in that, I'll call it a softer way, because there's no guns, there's no weapons, there's no kinetic ops, all that kind of stuff. But it's no less worthy, and it's no less meaningful in so many ways at the strategic level.
And I know I spoke to Hendo about when he went in 2005 to Pakistan on a humanitarian, and he's proud of that too. And he said it was a different role, and he said, but it was a rewarding role of and some people go, humanitarian, but they're some of the best deployments that you can do, because
absolutely
you're giving back to others, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely, mate, absolutely.
So you come back from that rewarding deployment, and then fast forward to 1999, INIFET kicks off in East. So Timor, the balloon goes up for that. You deploy him. What was your role over there? What were you doing in INIFET in 99?
Before I jump to that, can I tell you about having a mid-air collision with a boat?
Sure. How did you... Yeah, okay. Yeah, right. Sure, mate.
Part of the preparation for the 2000 Olympics was to develop a capability with the SAS for their rigid hull inflatable boats.
Yep.
And so they needed the Chinook to be able to carry them. And anyway, we hadn't done it before in Australia. It's been done overseas by different units, but it hadn't been done in Australia. And, the SAS were, very capable at doing this type of role. We would simply give them another option to be able to do some different things as a part of that role. And anyway, so we're doing flight trials in Townsville, right? And the day before, I'd finally done my Australian instructor standardisation, so I've been signed off as an instructor in Australia. And the next day, we're doing a flight trial. The squadron OC is the captain, and I'm the co-pilot flying in the right seat. And anyway, so rigid hull inflatable boat, about, from memory, about 6 metres long, about 6.5 tonne, decent sized boat. And you would normally fly any type of external load blunt end first, right? But for a whole bunch of tactical reasons, we needed to look at flying it pointy end first, so the bow of the boat first. The engineers wanted us to fly it on 40-foot strop, so we had 3 strops for the 3 hooks, forward hook to the bow, aft hook to the stern, and then the centre hook to both the bow and the stern as a redundant strop.
I can picture it.
And anyway, so they said, right, we need to do the trial on a 40-foot strop, and we're like, no, we're not doing it on a 40-foot strop. 20-foot strop is going to be a much better idea. So I was like, oh, mumble, all right, 20-foot strop. So we pick up to the hover, do all the hover trials, they're all fine and beaut. Then we do the testing with the automatic flight control system on, and we did that up to about 110 knots, 120, I can't remember, 110, 120 knots. That was all fine and beaut. So we come back to the start again, and now we have to do the whole flight sequence again with the automatic flight control system turned off. Right?
Oh, right.
Because the Chinook can be flown on or off.
Yep.
Right? Lots of other helicopters, if you turn it off, it's now an emergency procedure. But with the Chinook, it's actually normal operations. And anyway, so we did the hover sequence, that was all fine. We got up to flying, we incrementally come out in 10-knot increments or 20-knot increments, 20, then 40, then 60, and then I think we were 10-knot increments from there, right? And anyway, we're up at 100 knots. We're in the town common area, which is just to the northwest of the control tower in Townsville, and kind of doing a racetrack pattern around there. And Anthony Griffith was the crewman in the front right, and I'd worked with Griffo a number of years on Black Hawk and Chinook. And anyway, so we're coming out of the turn, 100 knots, flight control system turned off, and he pulls his head in out of the airflow and goes, "She's steady, boss, steady as a rock." Puts his head back out in the airflow. Fuck it off, fuck it off, fuck it off! Oh, it was the biggest man squeal I'd ever heard.
So what, had the downwash pushed it up, or what?
So, well, the airflow coming onto it, it had just caught the nose of the boat, the bow of the boat, in the airflow, and so it started to fly like an aerofoil, and then got caught and just kept on getting pushed up by the 100-knot airflow, right?
Oh, wow.
And so the boat wrapped itself up around the side of the aircraft and hit the side of the aircraft exactly between the centre or the main fuel tank and the aft fuel tank on the right-hand side. So the rigid hull, the inflatable part of the rigid hull inflatable boat is about 18 inches, right? There's a 24-inch gap between the fuel tanks, and this 18 inches whacked straight exactly in the middle of that 24-inch gap. Oh. So I managed to just miss the fuel line, the fuel tank, front or aft. And we put some numbers together later, and basically what we think happened is the boat hit the aircraft when the boat was basically vertical, right, which meant that the 20-foot strop on the bow was probably at its tether, and that's probably what stopped it there. And the bow of the boat would have been only about 5 feet underneath the rotors when it hit, right? And in between the second and the third, fuck it off, was this thump through the airframe.
And you feel that every movement in that?
We don't necessarily feel every movement every time, but when this thing hit, it was a kick through the whole airframe. And it was like, holy crap. And so I punched the load off, right? And anyway, and the boat went sailing off down, and air traffic confirm ops normal. They are now. And so, we went back and landed. And just, again, it can go in an instant. And I think there were 6 of us on board, 6 or 7 of us on board the aircraft. Yep. And it literally could have changed like that. There's a whole lot more to the story that...
Yeah, absolutely.
A whole lot more to the story that goes behind that. But the man squeals from Griffo, and he was then my SSM when I came back as the OC. He was the SSM. So we were in Afghanistan together, and there was another little man squeal over in Afghanistan as well.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that shortly. Yeah. So, wow, and that's learning new, trying new things. Did you end up solving that problem going forward for that capability, or
No, so it got scrapped.
Yeah.
Then, I mean, investigation and all kinds of things happened. Part of the investigation found out that the Americans had punched off a load in almost the exact same configuration as what we were in a month earlier.
that would have been handy to know before you
Would
did
have
it?
been really handy to know. And I like to say that liaison is a lot better now than it was back then. But yeah, so the capability, as far as I'm aware, the capability exists now, which is fantastic. But unfortunately, it took a hiatus for a while there. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you say, it's the army is it's good at overcoming and adapting, but yeah, sometimes it's a bit slower to just engage with the other and go, oh, we actually, guys, what you're trying to do, we had this happen, maybe try this, or you know, things happen. But mate, we're going to take a quick break and we'll come back and we'll pick up on your deployment to East Timor. Welcome back to part 2 of, we just had that short little break, and mate, so we're picking up in 1999, the balloon goes up for Timor. What was your role over there?
Yeah, so I was the adjutant, or assistant adjutant or adjutant at the time, I can't remember. And and my first child just born. And anyway, and then a little bit, a week or two later, it all blew up. And anyway, for various reasons, the boss said to me, listen, we're going to need 2 or 3 rotations here, and I don't need you on the first one. So how about you stay here for a couple of months with your firstborn, and then you can come over on the next push. Okay. So that was one of those times when, I didn't jump up and down and say, no, I'm going right now, right? Because I had something else that was actually more important.
Yep.
And I'm very privileged to have been able to have that choice, I know there's countless examples of guys who have been deployed when their partner gives birth, or gives birth and then they're on a plane that day, the next day. So I was very, very privileged and very grateful. So went over there and I was 2IC of the Black Hawk Squadron. So
You transferred back to the Black Hawks at this stage, or were you still flying both?
No, so I was only flying Chinook, but I'm trying to remember now actually. Yeah, sorry. No, I wasn't I was in C Squadron, in the Chinook Squadron. I wasn't the adjutant. I rather mixed up with another thing. Yeah, so I was in the Chinook Squadron and recalled because of my previous Black Hawk experience to go over there. And so went over as the 2IC of the squadron group, and if it looked like it was going to prolong, then I was going to have to do my Black Hawk refresher and then go back on the Black Hawks.
Yeah, okay.
That was part. It wasn't really the deal. That was the Kev. This is what's happening. I'm like, yes, sir. And so I went over there went over in December '99. Was there for a couple of months. Came home in February. I think it was start of Feb. For 5 weeks, or 5.5 weeks, long enough to do a 5-week Black Hawk refresher, and then jump on a plane and head straight back again.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so were you guys just bringing in supplies to the guys that were like the infantry that were over there, or what was like? We not doing humanitarian or anything like that. It was just plain and simply just basically resupply.
Yeah. So it was. There were a number of troop insertion tasks and extraction. There was resupply tasks. There was AME as well. So we always had an aircraft on AME, or 2 aircraft on AME.
Yep.
And then there was a little bit of just hash and trash and whatever else around the place. So it was a pretty mixed bag. A true general utility kind of setup.
Yeah. So you come back from that, mate, and then I'll fast forward to a day that everyone remembers, September 9/11. Where were you, and what do you remember of that day?
Yeah. So I was at my sister's house in central New South Wales, and just woken up, and went out, and everyone's just staring at the TV, and they're just looking at it going, oh my God. And I saw it there, and I said, we're going to war.
And that I've spoken to a lot of veterans, is the exact same thing. They and took a couple of years to really ramp up. But did you, at that point, foresee that from those actions that Australia would be involved in its longest war in Afghanistan and also Iraq? Because at that stage, no one was talking in the Middle East.
No, that's right. And did I think it was going to turn into our longest war? Not a chance. Certainly I wasn't thinking that. And at that stage, our heads were still very much in East Timor. I had another trip there in 2000, another one end of 2000, another one 2001. So our heads were very much in the near region. But when that happened, all of a sudden, our heads picked up and, okay, we need to look somewhere else because we're going to be getting a job here in some way, shape or form. Yeah.
And then, as you mentioned in part one, you ended up in Iraq in 2003. What were you doing in Iraq? What was the role that you were involved in were you with the guys that went, like the infantry guys? And
yeah, so I was the LO to the Special Forces Task Group.
Yep.
And outside of Iraq. So the whole task group was outside of Iraq. And then when the D-Day came, then forces crossed the border and went in. I was not with them for that. I want to be very clear. I was not with them for that. I was with the headquarters back outside of Iraq, and watching it. I still remember being in the headquarters, watching all the Blue Force trackers off on the screen. That was, oh my God. The entire wall of this building was covered in TV screens with the whole map of, centering on Iraq and then a whole bunch of areas around it. And it was like the start of, almost the start of the wacky races, right? So there's hundreds and hundreds of blue icons all around the borders, right? And there's like 3, 2, 1, go! And next thing you know, there's all these blue icons racing across the border at different speeds, right? Because some are aircraft, some are jets, some are helicopters, some are tanks, some are Land Rovers, whatever else, racing across the border. And I think it was only, I'm going to say 40 minutes, but don't quote me on it, into it was the first helicopter crash. There was if I remember rightly, a CH-53 had crashed on a dust landing. And I think, from memory, everybody got out of it. Yep. But anyway, that was the first, problem in the plan that then had to be solved. And everything and everybody just went about it like clockwork. Bang, 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 bang. Something that we drilled again and again and again. That was another team. That was a fully American process going on with that. I wasn't involved in that, but just watching it happen, it was just another fully drilled process, the same as everybody goes through.
Because I know I've spoken to a lot of other veterans who deployed to Iraq in 2003, and they said it was the first time they'd really worked alongside the Americans, and they just couldn't believe how big the US, when they turn it on. And was that the same for you with the air wing and seeing their air capabilities? And was that just like, oh wow,
absolutely, the scale was just next level. As I said, I'd been to Fort Rucker and done my Chinook training, and there's the central hub, which has a number of airfields, and then there's all these satellite airfields around it, right? And I remember driving down a road and losing count at about 150 Hueys, right? Just insane, the amount of aircraft, and just the numbers just staggering, right? But then when you see it on deployment, it's just next level compared to what we have seen in Australia.
Because at that point, what was our fleet? What was our capability at that point? I know we're a lot smaller.
Yeah.
What was our the whole
Australian Defence Force? We had 4 Chinooks. We had actually 2003. I think we had 6 Chinooks by then. We had 26 Black Hawks or so, and I think we had 30-something Kiowas. That you get in the picture, right? It's just insane, the difference.
Yeah, right. So you're over there, and how long was that trip for?
So that was only really short for me, and indeed for the whole Chinook push. We went across there. We really were not prepared, and there's a whole long story that goes behind this. The very short version is that we had been so politically correct for a very long time about offensive capability and all the rest of it. And we had our eye on the near region where there wasn't a great tactical threat. We were more about, helping out our neighbours. And so real warfighting had fallen off the radar. And so all of a sudden we were deployed to a location where they had, anti-aircraft missiles the size of telegraph poles, as well as shoulder-launched missiles, as well as, RPGs and all these different kinds of threats. And we were grossly unprepared. Unprepared. And so we had a rapid acquisition program that, looked at modifying the aircraft with flares and chaff and radar warning receivers and ballistic protection and, secure comms. We had no secure comms.
Wow.
All these kinds of things, right? So we were grossly unprepared. And
so do you report that back and say, hey, guys...
all this was known about prior to.
Yeah, right.
So
okay.
So there was a whole bunch of aircraft modifications happening in the couple of months leading up to it, and continuing to go on while we were there, and then after Baghdad had fallen, I don't know, it had been a few days or so. I was on a plane with some other folks to go across into Baghdad. So we're in Baghdad for a week to look at the consulate being re-established and being able to support that, and Chinooks being a part of that. And anyway, and we looked at the threat assessment and various things, but then also there was a political decision in this as well. And could we have done it? Yes. Were we going to be adequately prepared for it? Not to the same level as the regular US Army, but we were probably the same level as the National Guard.
Oh, wow.
Right? And anyway, and for whatever reason, I don't know the exact reason, but for whatever reason it was decided that we weren't going to put the aircraft into Iraq. So our Australian Chinooks never deployed into Iraq. They were outside of Iraq doing a whole bunch of work that was important and meaningful work to help support the coalition. And so I was only there for 2 months, I want to say, two and a half. And I think that everybody was home in about 3 to 3.5 months out of the Chinook push.
Yeah, right, okay.
Right? The rest of the SFTG have a whole bunch of different timelines.
Yeah, right. And so you come back, and then what's happening at the end of 03, 04 for you at this point in your career?
Yeah, so I was on a ground job. So I'd finished in 5 Avon the end of 02, the end of 01. Went on a ground job to Headquarters Training Command in Sydney for 02. And at the end of that year, got a phone call saying, hey, Kev, we need you back at 5 Avon to deploy. And then 03, deployed for a few months of it, and then a few courses when I was at Land Headquarters at that stage. And then 04, went to Staff College in Canberra. Yeah, okay.
So is that then now, this is because I've spoken to Dan and I've spoken to Langers, and this is progression of you're now starting to move away from the tools or you're still on the tools, but you're progressing your career. Is that
yeah, that's right. You're progressing your career, and different corps have different requirements for their subunit commanders. Some require you to have gone through Staff College, others don't. For C Squadron, because you're dual-hatted as an OC and a chief instructor, and a few different things, then they wanted that as a post-Staff College position. And yeah, if you're going to Staff College, then there's an expectation that you will make the next rank of Lieutenant Colonel and possibly Colonel after that.
So is that back at Duntroon? Is that in Staff
College? No, it's over. I think it's Western Creek. I think that's what it's called.
Okay.
over in Canberra, in the west side of Canberra.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you mentioned back when we started in part one, you got to Royal Military College Duntroon. Is Staff College, it's another step up again, it's different?
That's right.
How did you find it?
Yeah, so Staff College you're treated far more like adults, and it's far more of an adult learning environment. Unfortunately, I had so my deployment in 2003, there was some undiagnosed PTSD that didn't come out for some time later. And there was also, unfortunately, that was really the kickoff of having a really shit boss and a toxic workplace. That deployment, or that subunit over there, almost had a mutiny.
Wow.
It was the command environment was absolutely horrible, absolutely horrible.
And we'll get into leadership a little bit later on in the podcast, and I know why you're so passionate about it because, and I know it myself, we've both seen good leaders,
Yeah,
and good mentors that we've both had, you know, and I've had it especially in the fire brigade as well. You've seen good and bad, and that's why you're passionate about the work that you do now.
Absolutely.
Throughout your career, is there? You mentioned at the start that that guy that cut you some grace in your training, he was one, but was there many others that you looked up to and went, hey, that's someone that I aspire and want to be like as a leader? Yeah,
absolutely. Just before I get to that, I just want to clarify, when I'm talking about that toxic command environment with the Iraq push, that was not the SFTG, right? That was the aviation element. So I just want to make that very clear for anybody who's thinking I'm talking about the SFTG. I'm not.
Yep.
I was very grateful to work for an outstanding CO and his team with the SFTG. I have, seen a number of really poor leaders. I have been a poor leader, as we were talking about a little bit before as well. There are times when I've been a poor leader, and there's some really horrible, toxic people I've seen. There's also been some absolute champions, and I just I wish that I had more champions that I'd worked with than I did. But you take the cards that are dealt, right?
Absolutely.
And there's been some absolutely brilliant COs. Rick Burr is one. He was CO of the SFTG. There was another aviator, Kev Pye, who he's passed away now, sadly. But he was one of the most arrogant buggers I've ever come across. And I don't like arrogant people. I really don't.
Yep.
And I called him on it one day and I said, sir, you are one of the most arrogant people I've ever met. It's Kev, it's all right to be arrogant as long as you're right. It's like, okay. Don't know if you quite got the memo on that one. But I tell you what, he was fiercely protective of his people. And he showed me that you really could work hard and play hard. He was the epitome of work hard and play hard. and there were, there was one particular mess night and dining in night, and he went in, he was the OC of the squadron, and he went into the dining president on the way in. You have the formal introduction and entry and whatever else. Yep. And he went in and said, good evening, dining president. I'd just like to apologise for what my men and women are going to do tonight. and it was just, I was just behind him in the line, so I heard it. It's first hand, and it was like, oh, awesome! He's giving us the green light. That is an awesome boss, and we had a wild time. None of it was anything that's going to put somebody in jail or whatever else, right? But he facilitated having an absolutely awesome night without going overboard.
Yep.
And so he was absolutely brilliant.
So you finish your time at Staff College, and is that you get promoted at this point? Is that...
No, so I finished Staff College, went to the Chinook Squadron as a major, to do 2 years as a major and as an OC, and then all things being equal, do a good job, I should get promoted at the end of that time.
And so in that, because I'm interested in that part of, so you become a major, you become OC, so is that your responsibility now doubles because you're in charge of the whole, they're pretty much under you, aren't they?
Yeah. So the squadron, each subunit is subtly different in size. Mine was about 100, which is reasonably typical for a subunit, and that comprised of aircrew, pilots and crewmen. We had both loadmasters and aircrewmen technicians, so they're qualified technicians who then do the aircrew training, and some mission support, ground handlers, refuelers, whatnot, ops staff, and the technicians on the floor.
Yeah, okay. And then you first deployment to Afghanistan, 2005.
Yep.
That's when we go back in. After we pull out, and history will show it was probably the worst thing to do, to pull out and come back in 05. And what was your role over there in 2005?
So just before...
So you deploy 2005, mate, first time in Afghanistan. What was your role over there?
Yep, so I was... so this was to go and do a reconnaissance to work out how, in what capacity, where... whereabouts we were going to be deploying the aircraft. So we went over, got loaded onto a C-17 with the SAS was still building up. So there was a LRPV and a couple other things, a few people and whatnot on it. And and I'll just go back a second, and because we spoke about, we're advocating to get Black Hawks with the Chinooks over there. The stated requirement and the reason Chinooks ended up going was because they wanted an aircraft that could lift an LRPV. Like that was the stated requirement. And the Chinook can do that, a Black Hawk can't. And that's really as simple as it was. We weren't looking at doing, at the very beginning, we weren't looking at doing a special ops air assaults or anything like that. It was plug our 2 to 3 aircraft into the American task force to help boost their capacity so that we would work for any nation that US task force would work for.
Yep.
And that may include Australian troops, it may not. There was a national card, if you like, an invisible national card that if Australia said we want the Australian Chinooks to work with Australian forces, then that would happen. But there are a whole bunch of limitations that come with that. And so, the whole reason that Chinooks went is to lift an LRPV. And so my role was to work out where was the best place for us to be able to do that. How are we going to plug in? The SFTG were in Tarankout, as everybody knows. But at that stage, in 2005, there were no other permanent aircraft basing in Tarankout.
Yeah, right.
So there was a detachment there, an AME detachment, but there were no other aircraft there. Others would stage through. And one thing that we learnt from the Iraq push, they took 3 aircraft over there. With the modifications that were going on, aircrew training, various other things, one of the terrible things that happened out of that deployment was that they flew 5 of the 6 aircraft into a phase wall. So that means that all the deeper level maintenance is all due on if not 5, certainly 4 of the aircraft all at the same time, instead of having a stagger where there's only 1 in there at a time. And it just crippled the capability for about 18 months. It was absolutely terrible. We still only had 6 aircraft. We were going to have a higher rate of effort in Afghanistan than we were in Iraq. And so I said to everybody, I'm really sorry, but we're not going to send 3. We're only going to send 2. Now, I almost got shot. How dare you? What are you talking about? You've got to send 3 aircraft. I said, I can send 3 aircraft, but we will be completely cooked in 6 months, right? Because we just won't be able to sustain it. We've only got 6 aircraft to start with. We just can't do it.
Yep.
And on top of that, we really would have struggled with manning and various other things, right, across all the different trades, not just aircrew, all the different trades. And anyway, so, I was the most unpopular fella in Afghanistan when I made that announcement, I can promise you. And I was bloody unpopular at home too. And in Afghanistan, you're going to fly everywhere with at least 2 aircraft, right? So if 1 aircraft gets shot down, crashes, whatever else, the other aircraft can hopefully help out in some way. And with only 2 aircraft going, then at some stage we'll lose an aircraft, it'll be unserviceable, right? So I just said, we can't, I'm really sorry, but we're only going to bring 2, and because we're only bringing 2, I can't base them in Tarankout. Just not going to happen. Even with 3, I wouldn't have based them in Tarankout because there's no other permanent aircraft there, right? As I said, if you're going to drop 3 people somewhere, you don't need 2 Chinooks to drop 3 people somewhere. So there were a whole bunch of things, and so no, we got to be in Kandahar so that we can embed properly with the US task force and then get all of the effects, all of the leveraging that's possible to come with that. And so I was only there for, I was only meant to be there for 2 weeks. I was there for about a month because I wanted to fly on some of the American missions because they have, as I said before, they've got a different training system to us. They've got a different set of rules around all different things. Everything from the height that you fly to how many hours NVG you can fly in a night to how you do inadvertent IMC. So that's if you fly into dust or in a cloud and all of a sudden you can't see the ground. How do you separate yourself from the other aircraft so that you can, and from the ground, so that you can keep everyone alive, right? And so I already had half an idea of some of their stuff, but there were a lot of unit-specific rules, regulations that I needed to get across really quickly. So then I could come back to Australia and then prepare the squadron for deployment, and also put forward the briefs and whatever else to say what rules I recommend we change to be the same as the US, what rules I believe should remain sacrosanct that I don't believe that we need to uphold. Because all of these, one, need to get signed off in Australia, and then two, need to get confirmed with the Americans that we're going to be embedded with, because we need them to be aware of any differences as well. The last thing you want to be is out somewhere at 3 o'clock in the morning, right, and they can do 6 hours of MVG and we can only do 4 and say, okay, fellas, sorry, we're going home now. That's not okay. So, yeah, so there were a lot of things to do there. And then, of course, I also wanted to observe a number of their missions. So I sat in the jump seat for a whole bunch of their jobs to really get a good feel for everything from their internal crew coordination to their external parties, whether it's with JTACs or with, other ground parties, blah, blah, blah. So I was there for about a month, came home, and then started a really intense training and preparation program, which involved a lot of flying at home, as well as going to the simulator in the US, going to the simulator in the UK, because they actually had a database for Lashkar Gah area, and so they had a really good dust simulation in there as well. And the cream on the cake was that they had 2 simulators that you could link together to do formation flying. Oh, right. So we went and did some initial individual person and individual and crew training for the pilots. But then when we went over to the UK, now we could integrate it. We could have it more theatre-specific, dust landings. We could put the 2 aircraft together. Yeah, it was a really, really great package.
And as you said, these are problems that, as you said earlier in the podcast, that we were thinking more helping our neighbours. Yeah. These are all problems that you got to solve and quickly, because
correct.
And these are things that hadn't happened before, and you've got to come up with how do we solve this problem?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And when we're now putting radar warning receivers and flare dispensers, chaff dispensers, all kinds of stuff on the aircraft. And apart from a UK expat, no one had ever flown with them before. So we needed to understand how they worked, how they operate, because you need to be able to operate those things, understand what the gauge is telling you, understand the auditory signals it's giving you, understand how the system works, what its limitations are, and you need to know all of this off the back of your hand so that you know when to do what when you're flying along. It's no good to pull out the book and have a look, right? When you're flying along, you get a radar, a rocket launch. Holy crap. So, the simulators, again, they gave us that ability to learn those things.
And I'll ask you this, Kev, because I'm interested. Because Afghanistan's different, it's higher in altitude, does that have an effect on how the machines work mechanically? Or?
100%. Yeah. So the higher the altitude, the thinner the air. So the harder the engines have to work for the same amount of power, basically. Same. Because the air is thinner, then you get less lift on the rotor blades, right? So the higher you go, you got to use more power and you're getting less lift, right?
Yeah, right.
So you're cutting in on both sides of that envelope, basically, right?
Yep.
And this is where, like I say, the Chinook was just incredible at shrugging its shoulders and saying, is that all you want? I can do more. Is that all you want? I can do more. So holy moly. And indeed, I read a book called Razor 03 by Al Mack from the US 160th, and talking about the initial invasion into Afghanistan in 2001. And they were flying this Chinook at 20,000 feet over the Hindu Kush.
Wow.
In cloud. Just wild. Some of the things they got up to, oh my goodness. Just next level stuff. Next level. Yeah.
That's just, mate, that's great. And as you say, the Chinook's probably shrugging its shoulders going, yeah, you got more?
Yeah.
Like, just give me more. Give me more. And it's like, as you say, they are a phenomenal machine. They are just, and I see why you love flying them.
Yeah, mate, they're absolutely brilliant. And and we still had, even though I spoke about the rapid acquisition program for Iraq, there was a massive rapid acquisition program for Afghanistan, where we had the next level of radar warning receivers and flare and chaff dispensers. We had the next level of ballistic protection put on. We had a whole bunch of different secure communications put in. We had microclimate cooling vest, which is a super cooled water, basically a couple of fridges in the back, and take your outer shirt off. You put basically like a radiator, a flexible one.
Are
you
they
put
sort
that
of like
on.
the racing, what you said, supercar drivers?
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So it has super cooled water going through it. So in it's 45 degrees Celsius.
Yep.
Yeah, this cools down the core body temperature.
Yeah,
Just
right.
incredibly effective. We had M134 miniguns put on, which was just a phenomenal capability. And there were a lot of other very jealous helicopter crews out there when we turned up with our miniguns. We didn't have them when we first got there. They were put on a month or two later.
Yep.
The list just went on and on and on. That's, the big ticket items. Then we had a whole bunch of crew-specific stuff for the crews. We actually, one of the things I did as well is because we're all told that if aircrew get down, they're a very high priority to be extracted and all this kind of stuff. But who knows how long that'll take. So we, as part of the preparation for the first couple of rotations that went over, I put the aircrew through. We got help from the Special Forces community again, which I'm very grateful for. Got help to put our crews through 4 and 5 man team live fire drills. Assault, didn't have assaults as such, but being able to conduct a short offensive and then a fighting withdrawal. All the pilots had 40mm grenade launchers, right?
Right.
And we had, anyway, we with our 5 people, we had at least a section's worth of firepower.
Yeah, right.
And all the guys competently were doing fighting withdrawals and live fire, all this kind of stuff prior to deploying. So, again, it's not just about flying the helicopter, right? You're a soldier first, you're air crew second, and you've got to be able to be competent at your soldier skills.
So, with that, attaching the minigun, do rules of engagement change then? And did you have to be clear on what the rules of engagement were for the crews?
Oh, mate, absolutely. Rules of engagement were extremely important. The rules of engagement didn't change because, whether you got a pistol or a minigun, doesn't matter. When you're allowed to fire it is still the same. And where you point it, no warning shots, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, it's all the same.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because I know Liz said it was like she always would say that sometimes it'd be for their part it'd change, but for you guys it was it stayed. Yeah,
it was pretty black and white in that regard, And there's other things that come into it as well, right? So one night we were, this is during Op Perth. We had a task to put a patrol onto this really high ridgeline, and we got up there with a couple of dummy drops as a part of it, and this particular point the only way, looking at satellite imagery and all the rest, and it was confirmed as we were approaching it, but the only way we'd be able to get the guys onto it is actually to just put the forward gear on and teeter just on the forward gear, and the forward gear, and there was enough. The big of it was big enough. The big of it, that was pretty good English, but the saddle was just big enough to be able to put the forward gear on, and then we'd swing the forward minigun out of the way, lower the front door, and the guys would actually climb out the front door onto the saddle. Right, that was the plan. And so what we did when we got over there was came in, final, had a look, just balanced the forward gear, teetering, yep, it's stable, we're okay. The saddle dropped down quite a bit on the left-hand side, but on the left-hand side the saddle dropped away pretty sharply, but on the right-hand side, about 15 feet or so outside the disc, there was almost vertical granite rock.
Oh, wow.
Right, going up, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 feet at least. And so it was only a very small area we could put our gear down. And so we just got stable, did the checks in the front, everything is good. I'm just about to say to Lee Maloney, he's at the front door, I'm just about to say to Lee, clear to lower the door. And this guy appears from behind a second granite rock that we couldn't see initially. This is at like 3 o'clock in the morning on night vision goggles, right? Second guy appears from behind a rock there, and I'm in the left seat looking across, the flying pilot in the right, looking across, and I'm thinking to myself, where the fuck did you come from? Like, what are you doing up here? No, but also at the same time, you do a quick scan, right? No radio, no radio, no phone. Yeah, so thinking, what the hell are you doing here? But as I said, quick scan, no radio, no phone, no weapon, no positive ID. And so a split-second decision to engage or not engage. And so rules of engagement we were talking about, right, is one consideration. Another consideration is we've got a sheer granite rock face, 15 feet outside the disc. And we've got a weapon that's going to fire 3,000 rounds of 7.62 millimetre, 3,000 rounds a minute. Right?
Bounce back.
Where is all that shrapnel going? Where are all those bullets going? Straight back at us. And on either side of this saddle that we're teetering on is 2,000 or 3,000 foot drop.
Oh.
So there's no positive ID, even though the guy's got no right in inverted commas to be there. No reason to be there. But if we fire, who knows what damage we're going to sustain? Will we be able to fly away? Will that crash us? Right. So I made the decision: abort, and we backed off. And Lee kept the weapon trained on him, and we went away. And so there's laws of engagement, right? Rules of armed conflict, and you can't cross them. You can't cross them. At the same time, self-preservation has a part to play.
100%. And that's what I want to get across to the listener, mate, is you got to make that split-second decision.
And it is absolutely split-second.
And I was speaking yesterday to the Northern Territory tactical police officer, and he was involved in a shooting incident that he had to make all these decisions within 5 seconds and before he shot the offender. Yep. And this is what I want to get across to people when people are, having a crack at our armed forces or our police. You've got a split second or 5 seconds, in his case, to make a decision. Yep. Life and death. Like, Kev, that's pretty high pressure. You've got guys in the back. Yep. Preservation of life. Like,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's what it is. And that's why I love getting you guys on, to bring the true perspective of what it's like, not what is made up, what it's like. Yeah. And so you go over there in 2005, you come back, then the training, the build-up starts for 2006. And in that, when you went over in 2005, do the Apaches run with you guys as you were going out? Like, are they your, like, you got the minigun, but are they're your fire support?
Yeah. So it depends on the mission. There's some jobs we go on, we don't take an Apache. It might be 2 Chinooks, it might be 2 Black Hawks, might be a Chinook and an Apache. So it changes depending on a number of considerations. Yep. And also, obviously, if it's something that needs more than 2 aircraft, then the considerations change again. But yeah, so the Apaches were great, and one of my first discussions with the Apache guys. So it was a National Guard Apache company from Texas, and sorry, I was just thinking of their name. They were the Jokers or something. They had like a deck of cards as their patch, and I think they were Jokers. Don't quote me on that. And anyway, they were great guys. And anyway, there was this CW4. So for those people who don't know, in Australia and the UK, we have other ranks, which are soldiers. Then we have non-commissioned officers, which are corporal, sergeant. Then we have warrant officers, which are warrant officer class 1 and warrant officer class 2. And they're your most senior soldiers. And then you have officer ranks of lieutenant through to general. Well, in the US, they have an additional rank structure which technically sits between warrant officer as part of the other ranks and second lieutenant, the most baby of officer ranks.
Yeah, right.
And the chief warrant system, chief warrant officer, starts at CW1 and goes up to CW5. So CW5, there's plenty of people in the US Army who've never seen a CW5, right? I've seen heaps of them. And they are... So these people have been... They are... So they're kind of like an SSO in our language, except SSOs are given normal officer ranks.
Yep.
In the US, they're given CW ranks, and so CW5 has been around for 30-odd years and will very happily walk into a brigadier's office and lay down the law, right? In a respectful way, but, no questions kind of way too. And a CW4 isn't far behind. And so the CW4... I was having a discussion with him. He's the senior instructor pilot for the Apaches. And it was my first mission, my first flying mission over there, and I was also the air mission commander, right? And anyway, and I made an extra point of just expressing my gratitude for being in command of the US assets and various things, and it's certainly comforting to have the Apaches alongside as well. And this fella just looked at me with a big grin. And he said, and I'm gonna try to put on my best Texan accent here, right? So if I foul this up, don't crucify me. He says, "Sir, I can't stop nobody killing you, but I can avenge your death."
There you go, mate. You didn't butcher that at all. That was very good.
And that was it, right? And no truer words were spoken, right? The Apaches alongside, they can't stop us from getting shot down. They can avenge our death, right? But again, it was another one of those really profound moments to just go, yeah, we knew that already, but at the same time, hearing that point blank just reinforced it.
100%. Yeah, it's comforting.
Yeah.
As you know, when you go up, you can only control what's in front of you. Like, you can't control if an RPG comes in, and you can evade the best you can, but essentially, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. You know that.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That's the risk that you take.
Yeah.
But to hear that, we can absolutely rain hell down on
them.
And
we can avenge your death.
That's mad.
Yeah, it's like, thank you for that.
Absolutely. So you come back, train up, and then 06 you deploy again to Afghanistan, and this time you're attached to the Special Forces. Is that right? We were.
So, yes is the short answer. We were under their operational control, but I was the Chinook element was assigned to the American task force.
Okay, yep.
So I had 6 different bosses across a few different countries. So depending on exactly what the issue was, and I needed to report to all of them, or some of them, or one of them. And it was appropriate. That's just how it was, right? I didn't have the manning for it. I didn't have the staff for it. Wasn't ready for it. Oh, my God. But anyway, that's just what it was. And so I had an Australian Special Forces boss, and I had an American aviation boss.
Yeah, right. And is that one for you, are they 4-month tours for you, or are they longer? What was your...
The initial plan was we were going to have 2 4-month rotations, and that was all.
Yep.
And we knew the writing was on the wall. It was going to be longer, but everyone kept on saying, no, it won't be. And, of course, a week after we got there, all of a sudden it's, right, you got to do 12 months.
12 months?
Yeah. And then we knew, for the whole capability, not just for us.
Yep.
And then it was, right, and it'll probably be 15. So it's like, okay, restructure so that you're not doing 2 rotations, now you're doing 3 rotations. Because by the time you do 15 months, of course, you need a bit of overlap for each one. So now you've got 3 6-month rotations. So, that's effectively what we transitioned into.
So for you with that, how was your wife at this point with you going, I was only supposed to be away for 4?
Yeah.
And young fan, how was that? And pressure was a bit of pressure at home?
Yeah. So was there pressure at home? No, there wasn't. My wife's incredible. I said to her, it sounds a bit wanky, this, right? But it's the truth. Before we deployed, anyway, we had a bunch of people over to my house, and things got a bit loose, and
as they do,
jumping off the roof into pools and all that kind of stuff.
As you do, mate.
And anyway, and it's like, it's okay. Let them go. They're okay. No one's doing anything too stupid. and we're about to go and do some stuff that's bloody dangerous. So just leave them be. And this is what I'm meant to do, right? I just firmly believe this is what I was here for. And so when 4 months turned into 6, she just, she'd been around long enough by that stage. She just went, okay, let me know when you're home, and rolled with the punches. So very, very independent, and I'm very grateful.
It's something that I'm going to touch on next year. Is I'm actually going to do a series with the wives and partners of the servicemen, because,
mate, that'll be a cracker. No one's done it yet.
Yeah, and
it's long overdue.
That's what I'm going to do.
Long
because
overdue.
We talk to you guys, the veterans, but it's the families that are left behind, mate. It's the sacrifice that the families make for you guys to go and do your job. Yeah, okay, you love doing your job, you're serving your nation, but it comes at a cost, and it comes at a price, and it's your family. And so I am going to do a series on that next year and line up some wives and partners, because I think it is. I think it's well overdue.
Oh, it is. Absolutely overdue. That'd be brilliant.
So you deploy, mate, and what's that like 06? Because you'd had a couple of test flights in 05. Now you're attached to Special Forces, and I mentioned at the start of the podcast, you were involved so Craig's episode was episode 100. He was in the Battle of DA Nile.
Yep.
You were involved in the Battle of DA Nile. Craig told an epic story from the ground. Now I want to hear it from you from the air.
Yeah.
And what happened in the lead up to that night, and from your eyes, what was going on?
Yeah. I'll try and do this in less than 4 hours.
No worries.
So, yeah, huge. So I won't dwell here too long, but we had to prove each different level of capability. So, bloody hash and trash flying, and then some combat service support, and we had to prove each level of operational capability. And special operations air assault was up there for what we were going to be working towards, but it still wasn't quite signed off just yet. And anyway, so we're
just taking a little pause because
pause there for the car.
For the nice car.
Yeah, we had the Canadians came and briefed us, said, hey, we've got a job on, and our Australians said, hey, there's a potential job here. And so we had a look at it. And it was for a medium value target, and it was a compound north of TK, and all of the standard procedures at the time had aircraft landing well outside of small arms range. And I'd seen a number of aircraft getting shot up. Sorry, I hadn't seen it personally myself, but aircraft coming back, getting shot up. I'd heard a number of reports of the 160th and other units getting shot up, mission failure occurring, blah, blah, blah. And I looked at this job, and for me, it was just an absolute Monty for the aircraft to land on the target. And if we landed, outside small arms range, then it was just going to be a long slog for these guys to get in. I could see it was going to be mission failure, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so I had a look at it all, and I said, guys, we'll do it on one condition. We assault the objective. And they're like, awesome, let's do it. They'd approached some other units who had rejected it. They weren't going to assault the objective. They were only going to do it outside of small arms. And so we started the planning. And when I say we started the planning, I can't remember the exact timeline, but it was within a week from go to woe. And so we did some extra work with the American task force and said we need to be isolated for this particular job. We got the Dutch Apaches on board for them to fly as our escort, and we did some dry runs out in the desert where no one could see us to do some rehearsals and with the Canadians and whatnot. And those rehearsals went. There were things that we learnt. There were a couple of things. Okay, need to do this, need to do that. But by and large, everything that we were planning on all worked. All was fine. And so what that did was give us some confidence that our SOPs, our TTPs, that they're all on the mark, right? And anyway, so we looked at, so then we're now, I don't know, 48 hours before, maybe 24 hours before, and getting ready for the job. And then when the night came, there was something else in the middle there. I just can't remember what it was now. But anyway, something else in that last 24 to 48 hours. Night of the job comes along, and it's time for us to go. So I went and picked the Canadians up, went up. Oh, that's right. As part of the plan, I knew that part of the reason why the missions were failing in Afghanistan at times was because of the spotter network, right? Highly effective spotter network, and one of the limitations for the Americans and for the Brits and whatnot is that when you're going to fly a certain type of mission and you do it again and again, then for a whole bunch of really good reasons, you do it with the same package of aircraft and whatnot. And of course, the 160th have got refueling probes on the front of their aircraft and whatnot. So it's pretty easy for the spotters to know which aircraft is which. Yeah. And so I said to the guys that we're going to plan this mission as though it is a logistics mission from start to finish. And so the aircraft, or we call it being buttoned up, when all the hatches and doors and everything are up, which is normally how we would fly it when we've got cargo inside. And so we put our human cargo on board, buttoned it up, and then went from there. We staged it. When you're doing a logistics run, you stage at a particular part of the base, and when you're doing different types of ops, you might stage somewhere differently. We made sure we staged the logistics part. And when we were there at Tarankout waiting for the time to tick down to the launch time, one of the passengers of the other aircraft jumped out the back for a leak, one of the Afghans, and I was like, get that guy back on board. Now, I don't know if he was trying to tip someone off, right, or what. I got no idea. All I know is that wasn't the plan. Get his ass back on board that aircraft. And they did, pronto. So that was good. Anyway, and then from there, there's only, when you're flying between forward operating bases, there's only so many routes you can take. And there's great big hills in the way. There's only so many routes you can take. And for some reason, flying along the logistics routes, nothing was safe in Afghanistan, right? But we flew along these routes regularly, no shots being fired, right? And so, again, we simulated the logistics run by flying these exact same routes until we were 2 minutes from the target, which was a hard right turn, and that was 2 minutes. And so hard right turn, and that's 2 minutes, give the 2 minute call in the back, and then we're on. And then we had the sparkle, which is a IR light that comes down to confirm the pad, and it illuminated the house, and so I gave the code word. Yep, that's the right compound. And there was something about that moment for me where it was, fuck, this is real. We're about to land 2 helicopters simultaneously straddling a compound with a full-on brownout dust landing expected to pads that we've only seen satellite images of. We better get, and we've got 35 troops on board each aircraft, plus our crew of 5. We better get this right. And it's on me as the air mission commander. But at the same time, whilst that moment was there was not a moment of hesitation. It's right. We're good. And so we continued in. Now from here, depending on whether you talk to the Canadians, the Dutch, an Australian officer who was on board the AC-130 overhead who was observing, there's a whole bunch of different perspectives, right? And I really want to make that point clear, different perspectives. There's some people who say that our miniguns were blasting away as we came in on finals approach. Not true, right? There's some people who say that there were enemy running all through the pad. Not that I saw, but I'm not saying it wasn't happening. I can say for sure our miniguns weren't firing, right? But there are eyewitness accounts saying that there were a number of enemy running through the pad. I didn't see inside the compound. My eyes were focused on our landing pad. And there was one guy up against the compound wall who was about to get a very rude shock. and so anyway, as we came in and landed, and so one of the things that I did as well is that we looked at a whole bunch of lessons learnt from the crash in 96 in various other missions. So we made sure we incorporated a bunch of lessons there for how to fly this approach safely. Came in, Dan Cash was on the controls with me. Lockie Hayes was the flying pilot of lead aircraft with Dirk Noordeweer as the aircraft captain. And they were coming in a bit lower than us, and there were some high trees in the undershoot for them, so they had to actually pop up over the trees and then came down pretty fast to the point where Dirk's first thought of their landing was that they had crashed.
Wow.
But things settled, everything's still intact, ramp's going down, and the guys are straight into the fight. Yeah, we were browned out at probably 15 feet or so above the ground. Dan nailed an absolute textbook dust landing, got the aircraft onto the deck, ramped down, and the guys were straight out. Our door gunner on the inside for both aircraft, inside relative to the compound, they had the PEC-2 laser onto the side of the wall because the dust is so thick you couldn't see a hand in front of you. So had the PEC-2 laser aiming across obliquely, so it'd be basically 90 degrees after they got out the back of the ramp. So the guys knew where they were running towards. one guy off the back of our aircraft running. We landed like 30 feet from the wall, right? Less than 30 feet from the wall, and about 10 metres for those other people who understand metres. And one guy was running so fast as he came off the back of the aircraft, he smacked into the wall and knocked himself on his ass, apparently. A couple of the others were literally one hand on the back of the guy in front of them because they just couldn't see where they were going, so they didn't get separated. Anyway, ramp up, back onto the clocks, onto the instruments, and then pick the aircraft up vertically through 150 to 200 feet of dust, pop out the top of the dust, and then roll away. And the fight was on. It was absolutely on. We went down to Tarangat, and so that's, so our insertion a bit easy, right? As long as you know how to do a brownout landing to a site you haven't seen before on night vision goggles when you're hot and heavy. And we went down to Tarangat, and we're about 15 k's away. We could see through the MVGs the explosions, the tracer, the laser going on, and through the radio, we could hear the fight getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And they found an arms cache and they blew that and various things. And the plan was we were going to go back and pick them up 40 minutes later because we're expecting 3 enemy blah 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 within about 30 minutes, or maybe 5 or 6. I can't remember exactly what the number was. What we didn't know at the time was that there was a shura, a Taliban meeting going on down the road. And so there were a whole bunch of Taliban in town with all their personal protection parties. And it seemed like the main barbecue was at this fella's house. So there were a lot more people there, and then immediately into the fight than what was first thought. And so the 40 minutes turned into an hour and a half, and 2 hours as we're sitting there on the ground at TK. And, we weren't in the fight. But all those guys were in the fight. So we were sitting on our asses getting ready to be ready, but they incredible. I've listened to all of your poddies about this and read a number of different accounts, and what they did by this stage was already incredible, let alone what they got up to afterwards. For the Canadians and for the Australians in particular. And anyway, so there was a couple of radio calls to just see if we were going to come back and pick them up because it had gone on now a couple of hours, and when I said yes, we'll come back, one of the pilots from the other aircraft came over and he said, "Boss, are you mad? We're not going back up there. That's way too bloody dangerous." And we'd already been talking about it in our crew. I hadn't spoken about it on the radio with the other crew yet, and he got out of the aircraft and came over to me and said, "Buddy, that's mad." And I said, "Mate, if we put him in, we're going to get him out. Go and get back in the aircraft, right? That's as simple as it is." And he did, and then went on about another half an hour or so, and somewhere in that time, he came over a second time, and said, "Boss, don't be going back up there." Now the reason he was saying don't go back up there was not just because of the fighting, right? The fighting was absolutely fierce from what we could hear on the radio. But the other thing was that, and the reason that the Canadians were checking with us was because I told them about our need for moon, right? And because we were a stock standard Army D-model Chinooks. We didn't have terrain following radar. We didn't have forward-looking infrared. We had a Mark 1 eyeball with a green lens over the front of it, being a night vision goggle, right? Yeah. So we had, that was the fanciest bit of kit we had. And
yeah, sorry for that interruption, the listeners. There was an ambulance just going by.
Yeah, so that was the fanciest bit of kit that we had. And we'd been waiting so long, the moon had gone down, right? And so without moonlight, what the MVGs do is they magnify ambient light. They don't generate their own light. So when there's no moonlight, because it's gone down, right, there's no starlight because it's overcast, there's no ground lighting because you're in the middle of Afghanistan, well, the goggles are all but useless, right? And it was now illegal for us to fly, like plain, flat-out illegal for us to fly. So not only was the fighting intense, but now there was no moon, right? So now it was illegal for us to fly. And then the next problem was that depending on how much longer we waited, the sun was about to start coming up, right? And so, yeah, sure, our night vision goggles wouldn't be a problem anymore, but now we're a really fat, juicy target, right? And we wouldn't have that level of protection of darkness. And that window was getting shorter and shorter and shorter. By this stage, the AC-130 had run out of ammunition on the, I want to say the 105. I think it ran out of ammunition first. And so we're really starting to be boxed into a corner of limitations for the situation. And anyway, and I just said to him, mate, there's 70 of them, there's 10 of us. There's no other way for them getting out of there apart from them on foot for 15 kilometres for a fighting withdrawal. There is no way that's happening. Get back in the aircraft. And he did, right? He did. And people talk about courage, right? It is not the absence of fear. Absolutely not.
100%.
And I have all the respect in the world for him for coming over and saying, don't do this, right? And I'm grateful for him when I said to him, go and get back in the cockpit, that he did, right? And I haven't spoken individually to each other crew member across both aircraft. I've spoken to most of them, not every single one. All the rest of them were the same. They were concerned, but at the same time, there's no way they weren't going back up there. And so when the call came in, it was, yep, we're on. Both aircraft started up, both aircraft took off, not a hesitation. And as we left the confines of Tarin Kowt, the world just went black. I say black, but the goggles actually get like a haze on them, like a static on a TV set in the old days. And so all but useless, right? And so Dirk Noordeweer, excellent aviator, and did a great job of leading us back in. Time, distance, heading. When you can't see where you're going, time, distance, heading. Or you're not sure, time, distance, heading, right? And altitude so that hopefully we don't bump into something. And he did a great job leading us back in there. And we were, I don't know, maybe halfway in, got a radio call to say that the enemy knew we were coming back and they were setting up an ambush and we shouldn't approach. Now, again, there's a whole bunch of different perspectives. There's one of the crew members say they heard me make a radio call in response. I don't remember even hearing that radio call in the first place. Crew members on the other aircraft said they heard it, they discussed it and said, if Kev doesn't tell us to stop, we're not stopping. It's as simple as that. If I had heard it, would I have changed my mind? I don't believe so at all. And anyway, so we kept on going. One of the Apaches then reported in that they'd been hit by fire of some kind and they'd lost hydraulics, so they need to return to Tarin Kowt. So we only had one Apache with us. And the plan was that the Australian Commandos would secure the LZ by fire. And the Australian Commandos created a horseshoe with from memory, they had 3 Bushmasters and 4 SRVs.
Correct.
Oh, there you go. I remember that one. And they used their 7 vehicles to set up a horseshoe for us. And we would come in to the open end of the horseshoe where each patrol that each aircraft was picking up, they had a buzzsaw, so a siloom stick on the end of a string and swing it around like a saw, and it's the perfect visual to see under night vision goggles. Anyway, suffice to say, when we were getting back closer into the PZ, there was plenty of light there for us to see what was going on because of what was going on the ground, right? Because of the fighting on the ground. So there was enough light for the MVGs to work. Got in, we found out afterwards.
Yeah, sorry, Kev.
Yeah, that's all right, mate. Another little interruption with adolescence.
Yeah.
So we found out afterwards from the guys on the ground there were RPGs going under the aircraft and over the aircraft. It's hilarious, this guy. Sorry, we just got maybe a 15-year-old running around on an orange scooter.
Typical of the youth today, Kev. Yeah, just wankers. Sorry, did I say that? Oh, sorry, to say that out loud. Yeah, and in recording, I'm not going to take it out because, that's why we've got youth problems. Anyway, sorry, Kev, continue.
No, I'm a bit more forgiving than that, mate. He's one out of however many, and it's time for him to go home and get tucked into bed.
True. Sorry, continue.
So, anyway, as we came in to land, browned out again as we came in, and with this one, for the extraction, Dan and I had actually, before the mission, we'd agreed he was going to fly the insertion, I'd fly the extraction. And throughout the discussions, it stayed that way. So when we were flying back in, I was flying the aircraft to go back in. And I just want to dwell on that for a second, because for any young leaders here, was that the smartest thing for me to do? Well, perhaps the jury is out. Some people have got a strong opinion on it. There he is. He's back again.
Sorry.
Yeah, so should I have been on the flight controls, or should I have been sitting there observing, running the mission, right? And there's two sides to a story on that, and I'm not going to dwell on it. But what I will say is, for anybody in a leadership position, be quite sure about...
Hang on. Sorry, Kev.
Yeah, should you be observing, or should you be... when I say observing, not passively, like you're part of the crew, or should you be on the controls? And, so for young commanders, from an aviation perspective, or from a leadership perspective, part of my philosophy is I'll never ask someone else to do I can't do, or that I'm not prepared to do. And from an aviation perspective, our aviation squadron commanders need to be every bit as technically proficient as the young captain who is there, because the numbers are such that you are a flight crew member, right? You won't be flying as much as the young captain, but as a squadron commander, you need to be every bit as technically proficient, so you're not a liability for the rest of the crew, right? And even COs, very close to that, not necessarily to the same level as an OC.
Sorry, Kev. Continue.
That's all right. Just had an apple thrown at us by said 15-year-old adolescent who keeps coming past on his scooter calling out kitten whiskers.
Yeah, real tough.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, Kev, continue.
And I was told by a one of the Special Forces COs who actually, he said, Kev, as an OC, I never ever got my boots wet. My boots dirty. Never stepped in the field once as an OC. And I said, well, clearly your job as an OC is different to my job as an OC, right? I'm not going to be sitting back at the CP. That's not how it works in the aviation world. And anyway, so flew in, brownout landing, and actually took it a little bit slower. And a couple of them made observations of how slow my approach was. And it's like, there's no way I was coming back for a second shot. Right? This was not... We were getting it the first time.
And this was it.
And this was it, right? And Jim Crow, who a British expat, who he's just retired actually from Chinook flying, instructing. He's been flying them for better part of 30 years. An absolutely outstanding aviator, leader, mentor, friend. And he's got a classic saying in his British accent: slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? And it is so true. It is so incredibly true that if you go fast and you miss it, all of a sudden it gets really ugly and it's far from smooth anymore. So, all right.
Continue, mate.
So I got the aircraft on the deck. There was still dust around, but you could see just all hell erupting all the way around both aircraft. There was RPGs, small arms, heavy machine gun, laser, tracer, across the front of the aircraft, down the middle of the aircraft, the side of the aircraft. It just went crazy. And we're sitting there and just absolute bedlam going on. And you know how I said when we had the mid-air collision with the boat?
Yep.
And you can feel the thump, right? When there's 30 troops storming on or off the aircraft, you can feel it, right? And there was nothing. Nothing. Still waiting, and there's nothing. I'm like, what the hell is going on? And I look down the back, down the companionway. No, nobody getting on. And I called Greg Maiden on the ramp. And I said, Greggy, those guys getting on, mate? What's going on? He said, no, they're standing here watching the fireworks. Can you politely tell them to get their asses on board the helicopter, please? Right? What I found out afterwards, many years later, they weren't standing there watching the fireworks, right? They were really concerned that if they got on board the aircraft, that then the Australian Commandos would be overrun, right? And so they were really in two minds now. They didn't want to be tabbing it beside the cars because there was no room in the vehicles for them. They did not want to be tabbing it 15 kilometres out, right? But at the same time, they didn't want to leave these guys in the lurch because, as I said, the AC-130 was already Winchester on 105mm, right? And shortly after we left, they went bingo on 40mm. Oh, sorry, they went Winchester on 40mm, right? And then they went bingo on fuel. And it's the only mission that they have ever gone Winchester and bingo on a single job. And so, yeah, the Canadians were really torn between leaving these guys. But anyway, next thing you know, there's dum dum bum 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 as they're thumping on board. We get them all on board, get up, lead aircraft's already departed, and then we lift up and we depart. And there's not a bullet hole, not a scratch on either aircraft. Somehow we got out of there without a scratch. And when I say somehow we got out of there without a scratch, I put that down to the Commandos and the AC-130. Right? The Commandos had the inner cordon, the AC-130 had the outer cordon. If those guys weren't there, we didn't have a hope. Not a hope at all.
Because I know Craig said it that he said you guys are the forgotten heroes of that night, and he said, mate, people talk of us having, you know, balls of steel, and you've heard his podcast. He praises you guys and says that he said the Chinook pilots had the balls of steel to come in and do what they did, and as he said, the Commandos were there was 24 of them and 300 Taliban. Yeah. So, and the Canadians were like, we're not getting on that. We're not getting on that bird. Yeah. And it was and they like, no, we're not leaving you. And then as the team commander on the ground said, it was, that's your way out. There's no other that's it.
Yeah.
Get on,
that's it.
Yeah. And
that's right.
For you, I know you said that when we first met, that I was having, you know, Craig on, who was in DA Nile, and unfortunately a few of those boys have since passed in later, and as you said, you'd love to have a beer with every single one of them.
Absolutely, mate.
And I know that they'd love to have a beer with you guys and say thank you for what you did that night.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, mate. Thank you. Yeah, it was a hell of a night, and you know, but it wasn't over yet, right? We still had to get back to base, and so the conditions are still absolutely perilous. And you know, before we even deployed, I'm just going to jump back for a second, right? Yeah. One of the things that kept on coming up was, okay, Humphreys, what's the risk assessment, right? What's going to kill you? Blah blah blah. And these really smart people in various headquarters, they're all saying, you know, it's shoulder launched missiles and it's heavy machine gun, you know, and 12.7 mil and this and that. And I said, no, you're all wrong. And they looked at me. You know, they're all very smart people in intelligence and senior sirs and all the rest of it. And I said, no, the most dangerous thing to us over there is ourselves. Making the right decision too late or making the wrong decision will kill us far quicker than what the enemy can do. Couple that with the terrain and the environment and the weather that's there, right? That combination of things, right, that's what will kill us first. And true to form, right, I would say of all the aircraft that I know of that got shot down before I deployed, during there, after and whatnot, across different nations, I'd say at least 4 out of 5 of them, right, there was some kind of error, some kind of mechanical problem, some kind of something other than the enemy that killed them or rode off the aircraft or both.
Yep.
And so as we're now jumping back to Nile, as we're flying home and the conditions are still perilous, it's illegal for us to fly because we can't see, right? Lee Maloney on the ramp of the lead aircraft. Sorry, before I get to that, those guys, before they took off, they were sitting on the ground just before they departed. And the Anthony Griffith, who was with me with the boat, he was my SSM over there. My SSM, I say that with utmost respect. Far out. He's not my SSM. He's the squadron SSM, but I consider him an outstanding man.
I know what you're saying. Yeah, I know what you mean.
And anyway, he was on the left gun, and Dirk was in the front left seat. Noticed a whole bunch of lasers and whatnot getting directed over to the left side of the aircraft, and Dirk, Griffo, mate, what's going on to the 9 o'clock? As he was looking down a bit further back, and anyway, next thing you know, Dirk hears the machine gun, the minigun, open fire. And there's guys about 100 foot from the aircraft setting up for an RPG or something. I can't remember the exact detail of it. But anyway, so he's engaging that one, finished getting the troops on board, and as they pick up and roll forward, fly forward, Griffo hands over the fire on that position to Lee Maloney on the ramp, and then as they depart, another group come down the right-hand side, and Scooter Wakeland on the right door gun engages them with the right door gun. And now they're about halfway back to Tarankout. Lee Maloney on the ramp is looking down at the ground and sees a couple of motorbike tracks on the ground. And he's looking at them a bit more and thinking, what's odd about those motorbike tracks? They're really parallel. That's really odd. They're about the same width as the wheels on the aircraft. Shit, they're vehicle tracks. Climb.
Oh, wow.
So that the conditions are such that the terrain was just rising ever so gradually underneath them. And Dirk noticed at about the same time that, they were right down, almost on the deck. And he called as well, climb. And so the aircraft climbed up away from the ground. But so that other aircraft now had 40 people on board, very nearly flew into the ground because of the conditions on the way home, mate. And I spoke to, CDF and CJOPs and various others before this, whilst I was deployed over there. And they all told me the same thing. The thing that keeps them awake at night over there was, as much as they're concerned about SAS, as much as they're concerned about the Commandos, as much as they're concerned about our Air Force Hercules and P3s that are operating and our engineers on the ground and everybody else, the one thing that concerns them the most is that if we have a Chinook hit the deck, particularly if it's Australians on board, but any on board, then we're not talking 1 or 2 or maybe even half a dozen casualties. We're talking 30 or 40 casualties. Yep. And that's the one thing that kept, and we almost did that night, which is really sobering.
Well,
right?
It is, mate, because it's something that I want to touch on, and we'll get back to finishing that night in a minute, but now I've got an understanding of when the Fallen Angel fell with the Commandos in 2010.
Yep.
With what you've just explained, now I'm understanding why things like that happened. And that, and as you say, your instruments are your things, and hang on, that horizon's getting lower. I understand now. Yeah. As you say, you were nearly on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And it puts it into perspective for people who, are listening, going, now I understand why you were so close. Look, it was, it was so dark. You're essentially flying blind. And, that's a key point that I really wanted to bring in. Then, so are you, as this is happening, climb, you're about to, you get back to, and are you hearing still the Commandos are still, the contact's still going?
Absolutely. Yeah. Still, contact's still in full swing.
Yep.
And I'm as worried for them as the Canadians are worried for them, right? We had no idea, frankly, how they were going to get out of that. And we could only do so much, right? We could get those additional troops out, but by the time we got back to Tarankout, there was now enough light. We had just managed to slide into that window of darkness, right, just before first speckles of light, of daylight, right?
Wow.
And so by the time we got back to Tarankout, it was now too bright to fly with NVGs, right? And there was a casualty on board the other aircraft. They wanted us taken back to the Canadian base, but that was through a whole bunch of hills. And I said, sorry, mate, we're not doing that. We got to wait at least another 20 minutes. So there's enough light so I can take the goggles off, so then we can fly through the hills. And thankfully that casualty was okay. But yeah, so we were still hearing the firefight going on, all the rest of it, and yeah, wondering how they were going to get out of there alive, basically. And having listened to that, I heard a bunch of reports afterwards and heard that there were no casualties, which was just insane. But heard various reports since, listened to the podcast, and mate, the Bushranger 40, just an amazing, incredible bunch of human beings,
100%.
super machines.
100%.
And yeah, I'd love to have a beer with them.
And I spoke to Craig about it, and I said, mate, were you fearful that you were going to die? And he said, I'm not sounding cocky or arrogant here, but he said no. He said we were just in the moment. We were just in the moment. Everyone knew what they had to do, and as he says, it was 2 inches thick of brass the next day when they come out of that, and that. He just said it was just phenomenal fighting by all the guys, and he just said, mate, he puts it down to training and luck. He said that was all it was. It was luck. He said luck you guys didn't get hit, and luck that they didn't get hit. And for the listener, 24 Commandos were left against 300.
Yeah.
That's more than... my maths isn't great, but that's more than 10 to 1.
Yeah, mate. Just everything about that engagement with the Commandos defies every bit of logic and every bit of textbook, Just absolutely mind-boggling how they got through that. But to do it without any casualties and without a full mobility kill on any of the vehicles. Yeah. Just, wow.
Unbelievable. And as Craig said, the OC was expecting at least 10 body bags. We're going to... And you... heard on the radio exactly the same thing.
I was expecting casualties, absolutely, 100%. And when we got back to the base, so we had a bit of a delay, and then flight back down to from Tarankout back down to Kandahar. Finished everything up, got down there, and I think they had only just got back to base. I think they were back to base by then. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, and we found out no casualties. It was like, that can't be right. Just can't be right.
Well, I think the angel, a hand of God was there that night for all of you to do what, and as Craig said, that was their second contact. They had a contact of where they got 13, a couple of nights before that. Yep. And then they had DA Nile, which was their second hit out, and then that's not even going into Op Perth, which we're going to get into Op Perth in a minute. Yeah. That just blows my mind.
Yeah, mate, absolutely. And what we didn't tell the Canadians, that was our first hit out. And it's funny, I didn't know that was the Commandos' second hit out, right? Until I listened to that podcast.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there going, oh my God, I thought they'd been in a heap of contacts by that stage. And same, the Canadians thought that we'd been doing that for ages. No, that was the first one of those we'd ever done. And so we, a historical point from an aviation perspective is that that's the first live Special Forces Aviation Air Assault Australia's done. And it was done by a squadron that is not a special operations squadron, that is not designated for special operations, etc., etc. And the only reason I'm bringing that up, 2 reasons. 1, because it's historically accurate. 2, because one of the things that was really disappointing about the deployment was the toxic environment within the aviation circles and a few other places. There we go. MotoGP underway in Brisbane. It it was a really toxic environment in a lot of cases, and the aviation special operations versus non-aviation special operations, Black Hawk versus Chinook, there was just a whole bunch of petty jealousy going on that was just shit. And I was Johnny in the middle. And yeah, when word came that we'd done this bloody air at Swell, then yeah, all of a sudden I was a pariah in many people's eyes. How dare you? That's our job. So give me a break, people. Anyway, so I don't want to dwell on that, but I mean, we've still got so much to talk about. Part of the reason why, to just jump to part of it, part of the reason why I ended up contemplating suicide, right, was because of the toxicity, the bullying, and all the rest of the crap that went on. It wasn't the rockets and bullets, right? Not pleasant, but they were part of the job. I fully expected they were part of the job when I was flying a helicopter, right? So be it. And a rocket through the bedroom and all that kind of crap. I wasn't there, but anyway. But it was the people, right? And like, why do we need to behave that way? Why do we need such petulant jealousy?
It should be, and that's the thing at the time, and now that's why I'm glad we're talking about it, mate, because there's not much on it. No one knows what you... That's why I wanted to get you on to talk about this, because Craig touched on it, but it's so great to now link the two of from the air, from the ground, and now people can go, holy shit, and instead of going, blah, blah, be proud that, holy shit, like, that's amazing what you guys achieved in pretty, trying circumstances.
Yeah, and very, very short order, right? Very
Absolutely.
short order. And the thing is that, yes, it was a Chinook deployment, right? But I tell you what, it was a hell of a lot more than just the Chinook squadron that went into making that happen. And I acknowledge that at every step of the way. We had a number of Black Hawk guys that were there was LOs in different places. We had technicians were all Chinook because they had to be from a legal perspective. But aircraft support, handlers, all this kind of stuff came from across the aviation capability. Yeah, Chinooks did the first Special Operations Air Assault. But that Chinook detachment was aviation capability.
Absolutely.
There in that 100 people.
And what was the next day? What was the debrief like? Because I know Craig spoke of that, and what was that like being in that debrief? Yeah. So I actually wasn't in the debrief. Oh right, okay.
Yeah. So I got some debrief components from the headquarters of SFTG and whatnot, and there were a lot of compliments coming in, right? And certainly down at I can't remember the exact name of it, but the multinational headquarters, it was a buzz with this mission that had been pulled off by everybody but the Americans, was how it was seen. Yes, we had an American AC-130 and a Predator over the top, but all of the helicopter and the ground force were non-American. And the reason that was important was because, the rest of the coalition meant to be stepping up, right? And finally, there was an example where the coalition was stepping up. So I'm not saying that to diss the Americans. I'm saying that because it was good for the rest of the coalition to show that they were starting to stand up, right? Yeah. And now what I didn't know was that mission was almost pulled by the senior Special Forces, not the Australian Special Forces, but by the boss of the Special Forces for the region, because he said, they haven't done it before. They pulled it together in a week. There's no this, there's no that. They're blah, 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 blah. Nah, this has got red lights. We're not doing it. And anyway, from what I understand, the Australian SF headquarters went into bat and said, no, this is all under control. Like, they can do this, which I'm very grateful for.
Well, and it put Commando on the map. Well, 4RAR Commando.
Yeah, put 4RAR on the map, put us on the map. Did a whole bunch of things, and it also, highlighted that the coalition can do it.
100%. 100%. Yeah. And like as you say, mate, it was probably a good thing it did go ahead, because 300, I think, or there was 150 by count from what Craig said that were no longer on this, breathing on this earth. So I think that's a job well done, and I think you would have picked them up. Like, who would have known where they would have, if you hadn't have had that fight on that, you know?
Oh, that's right. You know, there would have been a fight somewhere else.
100%.
Right?
And so then that happens, mate, and then not too a short time later, Op Perth.
Yeah.
And you were involved in Op Perth as well. And as you mentioned, that night of where the wall and that man, and because that was a long operation, wasn't it? That was it was 9 day. Was that right?
Op Perth. I think I want to say Op Perth went for 2 to 3 weeks all up. Right. So Nile was a prelim operation for Op Perth.
Yep.
And there were, I don't know, we flew a few missions as a part of that, and then very shortly thereafter I rotated out and handed over to the next guys. But yeah, so there was that one. There was another one, cliff top, where we're trying to get again guys into an OP. This time though, we could only get the aft gear on, teeter on the aft gear, and the top of the cliff top was undulating up and down, and it was only about 6 to 10 feet wide, so we could just get the aft gear on, lower the ramp, and they'd be able to scramble off the side of the ramp, not the back of the ramp, off the side of the ramp, to be able to get onto the top of it. But and so in the cockpit, dangling over 1,000 or 2,000 feet of nothing, right? And it's one of the things I talk about. It's looking over while you're sitting there in the front, and you're meant to be looking out the front, but there's nothing there to see to hold the aircraft still. So you're looking backwards over your shoulder, right, at the cliff edge and the cliff top, because the rocks there about 40 odd metres away. That's the closest point of reference you've got to look at to keep the helicopter still as you're hovering it. So your hands are out here and your head's back this way as you're hovering the aircraft, and you're just moving it like an inch or two at a time, based on the calls you can hear in the helmet, right? Because that's the voice of the crewman. And again, Anthony Griffith was on the right door gun, and Lee Maloney on the ramp. I think it was Scooter on the left gun. Danny Smith with me in the front, and and he's calling movement. You clear right 1, come right half. So we're talking feet, right? You clear right 1, come right a half, and so you're moving this thing just 10, 15 centimetres. And we tried the primary, the secondary, the tertiary, the alternate, and something we just made up to try to find somewhere that we could put these guys in, but nowhere. We couldn't find anywhere that we could keep rotor clearance, and we got very close a couple of times. So we're meant to have a 10-foot clearance. When I say we're meant to have, we keep a 10-foot clearance, right? And that's because sometimes you might be wanting to move a foot and gust of wind or something, and you might move a couple of feet. And so there's a couple of times we got down to about 5 feet. And it's like, oh, no, we'll pull that back out to 10. Yeah, a couple of times, Griffo, a little bit of a man squeal might have come out again at one stage as we got a bit tight. But, a month before that, we heard of a Chinook up in one of the other regions that was doing a very similar thing, not a special forces operation, it was a resupply into a pad. Had a big tree on the left and right of the pad, backing the helicopter up. And anyway, various things happened, and they hit the tree with the rotors, hit one of the trees with the rotors, unbalanced the aft head so much that it actually removed the whole aft rotor head from the helicopter. And the forward head was still flying, so still producing lift. So it flipped the helicopter over on its back and tumbled down the hill, killed all 11 people on board. And so as we're continuing to jockey position, find a place to be able to put this thing, and there was obviously the SF teams on the back as well as a LO and whatnot who was on headset. And anyway, and we ended up, there's actually other stuff that I just remembered as a part of this, but not enough time, too many stories. But anyway, where we ended up dropping these packs, I don't know what they weigh, but it must be 50 kilos, right, between their webbing and their packs and whatnot. Just enormous loads. And they really want to impress upon us that for every foot lower, they've got to carry that foot back up, right? And we ended up dropping them almost 2,000 feet lower, right? Because that was the first place we could find. And like, I'm sure there's a bunch of listeners out there going, you bastards, right? You pricks. Genuinely, that was the first place that we could find that was the highest that was actually able to be landed on.
Yeah.
To get the guys off. And when we got back, and so all of us, when we got back and had the debrief, and I said to the guys, all right, how's everybody after that one? Because that was really tight. And one of the guys turned around and said, yeah, let's not do that one again. Let's not do that job again. And the SFLO with us, he turned around and said, so what would you prefer, Op Nile or that job? And all of us together just said, for fuck's sake, let us do Op Nile, let the enemy kill us so we don't kill ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? It was too close. And, yeah, and anyway, they didn't end up getting back up. And the LO knew that was the closest we could get. He could see it. That we weren't going jack, not by a long way.
So for you, mate, you got everything you wanted and more in that 06 deployment. You come back, and then 07, are you back just training, doing all that sort of thing? What's happening in 07?
Yeah, so unfortunately there was a whole bunch of politics that went on that I'm not going to go into now. Yep. But suffice to say that, yeah, sometimes you can be really surprised by the integrity of some people, commanders and others.
Yep.
And you can be really surprised by the antics that some of them carry on with to feather their own nests. So, yeah, there was a lot of politics and a lot of crap that went on end of 06, start of 07. And what ended up happening for me was I ended up going back to command the second half of the third rotation and then pack it up and bring it home. And then from there I had some leave and then started work down at 16 Brigade in Brisbane.
Yeah, right. And then, because what year did you discharge? What year was that you decided enough is enough, and after 20 years pulled the pin? Yeah,
so I went on long service leave mid-2009, officially left in January 2011. The bit that's missing in the middle is having a breakdown and contemplating suicide in May 2008. And so I went back to Afghanistan again in early 2008, but this time very short deployment, like we're talking a few weeks, for me to certify the next rotation and then come home again. But what had been happening for me, 2007, as I said, there were a number of things going on, and when I was over in Afghanistan, 2007, there was a whole bunch of stuff really starting to unravel with my mental health, and my lowest point was when there was some probably egregious thing that this junior female officer had apparently done, and she was in the office, and I was giving her a face ripping, and I can't remember the young woman's name. And I can't remember what she had apparently done. Yeah, I can't remember what she'd done. I can't remember her name, so I can't find her to apologise to her. And she... I remember it got to the point where she wasn't looking at my face anymore. I realised she wasn't looking at me, and I realised she was looking at my hands. And I looked down, and my hands were just going bananas. They were just shaking like shit. And I tried to stop them, and I couldn't. And that's when I knew things were bad. So we go through our RTAPS process, return to Australia, psychological screening, answer a bunch of questions on pro formas, sit down with the psych. I fessed up. There we go. We got the next motor event. I fessed up. There was some stuff, as I said, out of 2003 that was still festering in the background. And I... asked for some help. Now, unfortunately, it took 3 months after I got home to finally see a psychologist. When I did see a psychologist, the two of us just didn't gel. We just did not get on. And anyway, so I just said, well, if this is the best the army can do and this is the best psychology can do, I'll do it myself. So I went down the bottle shop, and Jim Beam, Jack Daniels, all their friends, and they were my counselling sessions of an afternoon. And as many of us have done before. And as many of us know, that's about the worst thing you can possibly do.
100%.
And so bullying was just rife at work with the same guy from 2003. He was now my boss. And anyway, so bullying was rife at work. I was, night terrors, fuse that was super short, 3 little kids, noise and mess. Lots of noise and mess, and that I just want to be around. And I realised I didn't want to be at work, and I didn't want to be at home, I didn't want to be awake, and I didn't want to be asleep. I just didn't want to be anymore. And so I started working out ways to end my life. And so it was Monday morning at home laying pavers, and for anybody handy who's listening to this, I want you to imagine this because it's pretty complicated. You got a rectangular area, you got 2 45-degree corners, and you got square pavers. All right, is it sounding complicated so far?
Yep.
Bloody hell. Anyway, nothing I was doing seemed to be working, and the worse job I did, the more I told myself how crap I was. The more I told myself that, the weaker I felt, the worse job I did, and this cycle started. And it just went, it accelerated really rapidly. And before I knew it, I was saying to myself, now's the time, do it. Now's the time. And I went to, and I collapsed. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't go through with it. And I'm very lucky that my wife was home, and she found me, and she asked if I wanted to call Martin or Jeff. Now, Martin and Jeff are the unit psychologist, the unit doctor. They're work colleagues of mine,
I'm looking at the sky too.
Oh.
Nice show.
Okay, now we've got a thunderstorm rolling in. Awesome. Yeah.
Right as we get in the really...
Exactly, right as we get into it, right? Yeah, Martin and Jeff, unit psychologist, unit doctor, work colleagues of mine. I saw them a couple of times a week at work. And so it was the experience I never wanted to have, was to admit to those 2 people or anybody else that I was a unit, that I was it. I just didn't want to go on. And I was literally the fetal position on the ground, convulsing, incoherent, sobbing, and all I could do was rock and shake a little bit more to indicate yes, to get my wife to make the call that I couldn't bring myself to make. And so, they came around, we spoke for a couple of hours, and...
Yeah, go, mate.
And, yes, they came out, made a house call, and we spoke for a couple of hours, and that was the lowest day of my life. What I can now see is that actually just became the last day of that chapter of my life and became the first day of the next chapter of my life, right? At the time, I never thought I was going to be able to recover at all. And I certainly didn't recover on day 2, and I didn't recover on day 3, and day 4, or day 500. But, slowly we got there, and eventually managed to pull myself back out of the hole. Off work for 9 months, and then eventually went back to work on a return to work program 2 days a week, which, when your recent memory is of you flying missions in Afghanistan, and now you're going to work 2 days a week into a headquarters, it's like, really? Just the most demoralising thing. But you've got to be able to look past that and to look at last chapter, this chapter.
Yep.
And you go, and I often describe to people that we've got a whole lot has changed since that time, and I now have a new 100%. I don't have it's not the same 100% as it used to be, and in some ways it's better, in some ways it's not what it used to be. It's just not, right? But it's kind of like the US training program. It's different, right? It's a new 100% for the new version of me. 12 months to the day after my breakdown, I was in town, in Darwin. I'd been given a job offer, and I was in Darwin flying a BK-117 to start my civilian search and rescue pilot career, which was just mind-blowing for me to think that I was now rebuilding myself and going through with that.
And with that, mate, I know, and I'm, because you and I have spoken, I've gone through it myself, and I was tried to take my life 10 years ago, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I was there as well, and you do feel like an absolute failure. You reject yourself, and you don't see any other way out but to end your life. And now, and we'll get into it a little bit later in the work that you do now and the work that we both do to help others. And I know exactly the same thing is what you're saying, that putting your hand up takes courage.
Yeah.
And breaking down that stigma of, because you were in the military, you were, generations have been told, real men don't speak, it's weak to speak. That's all bullshit. And you're here now because, you did the work, and I say it to anyone, it's not easy. There's still days. I still have days, so do you, where there's good days, there's bad days. The good days now outweigh the bad days. Yeah,
absolutely, mate. And there's it's not really a caveat, but there's something I want to put on there. And I guess I best phrase it by saying crying in the cockpit is not okay. All right? When you're in the cockpit, there's other people relying on you to do your job, right? It ain't weak to speak. At the same time, you need to be able to be ready for the mission, right? And there are times when we need to be able to continue to, pardon the pun, soldier on, right? When you really need to.
Yeah, good point.
And it's something that I think is missing in the discussion around this, right? Because we're not suggesting, I don't believe that anybody is suggesting, not you, not anybody is suggesting that when we say it ain't weak to speak and that you need to be able to, to identify and acknowledge a bad day or whatever, you absolutely need to be able to do that. It is essential to do that, right? But you can't mid-mission say, I'm having a bad day, and there not be any forms of issues that arise from that, right? And I'm not saying consequences for you or repercussions for you. What I'm saying is that the mission is depending on you being a part of the team, right?
Yep.
And so this is where we need to be smarter about how we train, smarter about how we look after ourselves in the first place, right? To know that we are right to go on the mission in the first place.
Correct.
Right? And so, by all means, we have to speak up. We have to ask for help. We have to get better with our emotional intelligence. At the same time, when the mission is on, the mission is on. Yeah. Right? From a whether you're fire and rescue, whether you're police, whether you're military, whatever branch of service. So
absolutely, good, very good point. And I know for you, the way that your career ended, if you could take that last bit of the bullying and that, you had a pretty, it was a pretty distinguished, you were proud of your service. Because you transitioned into the civilian side of flying and into rescue, and did you find that transition hard, or it was just, I've taken that uniform off and now I'm in this uniform?
It was, I think because two things. One, because there was another uniform involved, and it was flying. Albeit, let me tell you, a 3-ton BK-117, single pilot, skids, and compared to a 20-odd ton Chinook, right? Two very different helicopters. But the other thing is that the chief pilot of Care Flight, who I started flying with, Jeff Koneman, just the most amazing man, pilot and mentor, and ex-Navy pilot, and Greg Olson, he was one of my Black Hawk instructors, a guy I look up to as well and consider a friend. And so those two guys had set the system up so that the system was pretty familiar to me as well. So I was lucky to go into a system like that, and I was in uniform, and I was, flying helicopters. So it was in many ways just keep doing what I'm doing in the main. No one's shooting at you anymore. So that's a good thing.
And probably for you too, a better work environment of better people that actually supported you. And I want to point out that there's no such thing as a dickhead-free zone. I for a little while I thought there might have been, but I've realised that no, that also exists. Tonight, mate.
Yeah, that also, a dickhead-free zone only exists in utopia. And in every environment, you're going to get people who you perceive as a dickhead.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean necessarily they are, and there's probably some other people who think they're okay. You know, it is what it is. And so, all that said, Careflight, when I started working for them, they were brilliant. And the bottom line, though, when it comes to an organisation is that policies are enacted by people. And you can have the same policy interpreted two very different ways. And, you know, it's up to the individual interpreting the policy as to whether they're going to be an arse or whether they're going to be still do what's right for the company, for the business, for the organisation, but at the same time look after the people.
Absolutely. And so you go into the Careflight, and how many years did you fly for Careflight for?
So I was with Careflight for 2 years. I was a check and trainer, MVG instructor and various things, but I was doing basically the FIFO thing to Darwin, and I was looking for a job closer to home. So a job came up with Queensland government flying down here, and so applied there, got accepted, and was there for 10 years.
Yeah, right. And then you finally hang up your wings after an amazing starting back in, you know, at Melrose Park, watching the choppers come in, land. Do you look back, mate, when you finally hung up the wings for the last time and just pinch yourself to go, wow, what a career, what a boyhood dream came true?
Yeah, although I haven't hung up the wings just yet.
I've
still got the medical, still got the licence. Just put it on pause for a little while I get the speaking business and other things up and running.
Yeah.
And who knows, mate? I may fly again, I may not. I really don't know. But everything's there, ready if I want to go back to it. Yep. But yes, to come to your point though, absolutely, mate. The pimply-faced kid who was, you know, riding his deadly treadly up to Melrose Park to watch the choppers land and take off, and yeah, wow.
You couldn't have, mate. You couldn't have imagined, you know, where your, you know, career would take you. And what's the old saying? Is a fly high and fly long. That's a I think it's a famous quote of an aviation pilot, that fly high and fly long and fly into the wind. And yeah, you've done that, mate. And it leads me to the work you're doing now. So you just touched on you're speaking, you're doing a lot of leadership engagement with big corporates, but you're also advocating for mental health. And obviously, when you had your breakdown, mental health wasn't as well documented. Where does that passion come from for you now to do the work that you're doing now?
Yeah. You know, if I go back to the start of my mental illness journey, it goes all the way back to 2000, my first trip home from East Timor, when I had a really bad panic attack going to get a loaf of bread. And, totally confused, totally embarrassed by, you know, throwing myself against a glass shop front. Didn't break anything, but just, you know, thought this wave of people was coming towards me, and for some reason my body unconsciously threw myself against the glass shop front. Embarrassed, confused, didn't tell my wife, didn't tell anybody else what had just happened, because I didn't know what just happened. I now know it was a panic attack. And I've had a few other panic attacks since. I've been admitted to an emergency ward thinking I'm having a heart attack. Been another time admitted to an emergency ward thinking I wasn't sure if I was having a seizure or a stroke. It just turned out to be another panic attack. And veteran, you know, suicide is something that's talked about a lot these days. It was being talked about in the late 2010s, right, the 20-teens years, but still not being talked about enough. And as I said, so it was 2008 when I contemplated taking my life, and December 2019, a friend of mine, a pilot from the squadron in the Chinooks, and he took his own life in Townsville, Steve Faisal. And I was in Townsville on shift with the rescue chopper on Anzac Day 2020. So COVID Anzac Day, no one marching, blah, blah, blah. I was on night shifts, so I was actually there the day after Anzac Day. Came off night shift and went down. And as I was wandering around the Townsville Cenotaph area and whatnot, just reflecting on lives lost in service, lives lost after service, Steve's life, my life, whatnot, I came around the corner to the main cenotaph. And sorry, I just need to grab a quick drink.
Right, mate. All good.
Came around the corner to the main cenotaph. And for those who know it, in Townsville, the main cenotaph has an archway before it. And on the right-hand side is a stone plinth, and that's the RAR Memorial. And on the ground next to that stone plinth was an A5-sized funeral service booklet. And there was a rock on each corner holding it down. And I looked down, and it was for Private Bradley Carr. Now, I never met Bradley. I don't know him. But he took his life on Anzac Day the year before. And when I looked at his age, he was 34. And I was 35 when I almost took my life. And I got angry. And I thought, is this really the best that the families have got? Is this really the best that friends have got? To put rocks on a bloody funeral booklet. And I looked around, I thought, I'm going to get a memorial put in right there. And 5 months later, on International Suicide Awareness Day, we unveiled the first COR INFINITUS memorial. Now, COR INFINITUS is is Latin for infinite courage. COR, spelt C-O-R, is Latin for the word heart. Heart was the original root word of the word courage. And the original meaning of courage was to speak one's mind by telling all one's heart. And I thought, geez, if there's anybody who needs to speak their mind by telling all one's heart, it's the families of veterans who have suicided. And so I won't go into the full story of putting it all together, but I consulted with a number of families that are bereaved by veteran suicide. I put together some words for the dedication and then got psychological input, clinical input from Mates for Mates and Open Arms and North Queensland Primary Health Network. And so I wanted to make sure that this was, not that it was okay, so I wasn't asking for anybody's permission apart from the families. That was the question I asked the families. Do you want this? Is this okay? And they all said absolutely yes. But I wanted to make sure this wasn't Kev's idea that was going to hurt somebody. And so what we ended up doing was to get 5 statements from 5 people who have been impacted by suicide: a partner, a parent, a child, a mate, and someone who's attempted suicide but survived. And I approached 5 real people impacted by suicide and asked them for a statement to use. Got those statements and then put them together along with some phone numbers for help if people need help when they're there, and ran that back by the clinicians. And they said, Kev, we think you've cracked the code for how to do this safely, appropriately, and whatnot. And part of doing it was, and I didn't mean this for any particular reason from a clinical perspective. I meant this purely out of respect, because COR INFINITUS is all about dignity and respect for the families and for those that are gone. And so therefore, it's not about Steve, it's not about Bradley, it's not about me, it's not about any one individual, it's about every single one of them. And therefore, the COR INFINITUS memorials are completely anonymous. There's no names on any of them, and there never will be, because COR INFINITUS represents all those who have served their nation and taken their own lives. And it doesn't matter what era, what service, what gender, what reason. None of that matters. What matters is they served, and their families are bereaved, and their families need somewhere where they feel that they're welcome, that they belong, that they can sit, mourn, grieve, hope, and heal. And so there's now 21 COR INFINITUS memorials around the country, stretching from Corando in North Queensland down through Brisbane, New South Wales, the Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne, Wallaroo over in Adelaide area, and there's others underway in Darwin, Perth, Tasmania, more in Brisbane, Darling Downs. Yeah, there's a lot more on the way. I'd love it that these things didn't need to exist. I'm sure we all would love it if 100%. They didn't need to exist. But they do need to exist, and my aim is to get one in every city, suburb and town around the country. And I'd love it if anybody listening to this wants to help out by becoming a local champion in their area, to jump onto the website www.corinfinitus.org I'm sure it'll be show notes and whatnot.
Notes. Yeah, absolutely.
Jump on there, get in contact with us, and we'll tell you what to do. It's actually very simple to do. There's funding available through state and federal grants, and lots of local and other philanthropy. People want to recognise this and want to help the families out. So, yeah, I'd love for if you're hearing this and you want to help out, jump on,
mate. That's pretty special to, as you say. We wish it didn't exist, but unfortunately it does. And we were talking, a couple of hours ago when we started the podcast of, 9 people a day are taking their lives in Australia. In Australia, that's just it's. And as I said to you, So when I started, mate, as we were saying that 5 people were taking their lives when I started writing my book. It's now gone up. It's now increased to 9, and 7 of those are men. And the numbers, they're getting worse. And this is why now you are in the space, and so am I, to advocate. And this is why I'm so passionate about doing the podcast, is to tell people that there's others out there who have walked that path, and the dark days, they do fade, and it does get easier, and life does. Mate, I've reflected the other day, I turned 32, and...
You're a baby.
Yeah. Mate, I look about 100, but, with no hair. And but and I was asked by the ladies on the cake, they were putting the candles in, and they said, are you 23 or are you 32? And I said, no, I'm 32. And they said, you sure? We can make you 23. I said, no, I go back to where I was 10 years ago, ladies. And I said, no, I don't want to be back there. I said, I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to end my life at 22. I said, I'm quite happy where I am at 32 and the journey of where I've got to. And I said, if I had had a crystal ball that day, and as you said, it's exactly what you said, that chapter. And people often ask me when I talk about the book, your suicide chapter must have been the hardest chapter to write. I said, no, it was the easiest. It was the easiest chapter, and I don't say that I'm not just like writing that off because the old Adam died that day.
Yeah.
The new Adam was born, Adam 2.0, walked away from that cliff that day, and mate, the hardest chapter to write was actually my substance abuse chapter, and sliding into using drugs before I got to that cliff and telling my parents. That was the hardest chapter, and it was the last chapter I wrote in the book. And this is why we do what we do, mate.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely, mate, absolutely. Admitting to your loved ones, substance abuse, the suicidal ideation, all that kind of stuff, is one of the hardest things possible to do. Ironically, they're the ones we often hurt. I realised when I was going through my rehabilitation post-breakdown that the best way I could describe it to people and the way it seemed was that it was like riding a roller coaster for the very, very, very first time. Some excitement, some trepidation, some good days, some bad days, some things you think everything's under control, and then a turn out of nowhere, and all of a sudden you're upside down, back to front. You don't know which way the next turn is coming. There were times during my breakdown, during my recovery, still contemplated suicide, abused alcohol, all kinds of stuff. The thing I realised was that it wasn't just me riding that roller coaster. I'd strapped my wife and kids in as well. They were in the carriage in front of me, beside me, behind me, whether they wanted to be there or not. And they were there now with me on the recovery. But the biggest realisation for me was, holy crap, I'd strapped them in for I don't know how long before the breakdown, right? They'd been on a roller coaster with me, and I'd hiding it as best I thought I could. I hid the suicidal ideation very well. I put a mask on so no one could see that.
Yeah.
But clearly, I can only imagine in hindsight that there were times when I was unstable in some way, shape, or form, and they were copying it.
Well, I was exactly the same, and it was only my mum actually said it. She goes, Adam, I had no idea. And I hid it from... And everyone I told afterwards when the book came out, they're like, Bloom, we had no idea. And I said, yeah, because I was a jovial idiot. I gave you what you wanted. I said, I got a Golden Globe. I would have got a Golden Globe for my performance, but on the inside I was screaming, and I said, how long can I keep this facade up?
Yep.
And then eventually the damn wall burst.
Exactly.
Same thing.
Exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing.
And so now, mate, you're doing this amazing work that you're doing. You're advocating for, mental health, leadership. You're speaking. Mate, I want to ask you this, and we're nearly finished, and it's just been an absolute epic, and we could have spoken for another, 4 or 5
Absolutely,
hours. What are your plans going forward with your wife, your kids, and just you away from speaking, and just you as a person going forward into your future?
Yeah, well, mate, in 3 days' time, we jump on a plane to go and celebrate our 30th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
And thanks, mate. Thank you. And, my wife has stuck with me through thick and thin. And, 30 years of marriage is not easy. It's not easy. And I say that from her side as well as my side. And, it just is. Marriage is not a walk in the park. My kids are all adults now. They've all left home. They're all doing their own thing. And they're all amazing young humans, young adult humans, right? And that's changed the dynamics now a lot, as any parent would know who has children who have flown the coop. So, from here it's really, starting to enjoy. We've just got a couple of specks of rain.
Yeah.
All right, we're in the final throws.
Hopefully we can get this really done.
It's continuing to work hard with the speaking, in around the world as well as around Australia. Travel as a little bit of that, right? And also make a difference in the mental health space. So
yeah, nice. And mate, what advice would you give to any young person out there who is thinking of pursuing a career in flying and in the military?
Go for it. I had some bad experiences in the military. I had a whole bunch of great ones. Don't think that the military is a 9-to-5 job. Don't think that flying is a 9-to-5 job, whether you're in the military or not. But on balance, well, I think that serving your country through the profession of arms is the most noble profession that anybody could do. Pure and simple.
Any service, mate, first responder or veteran.
Yeah. And so if you want to join the military, jump in. If you want to go flying, absolutely jump in. If you want to drive garbage trucks, jump in. And I'm not saying anything bad about garbage trucks. I'm just saying that if you're going to do something, grab with both hands and do it.
Do it 100%.
Do it 100%. And have your eyes wide open for the good folks and the not so good folks around you.
Absolutely. I've got 2 more questions before we get rained on. Mate, what advice would you give to your 18-year-old self, and would he listen?
No, he wouldn't have listened, so the first part doesn't matter.
Oh, mate, that's gold. That is gold. Good way to... And the second one, mate, what advice can you give to people who might be struggling with their mental health and just don't know where to turn or ask for help? What advice can you give to them?
Yeah. The first thing is know that the best thing you can do is put your own mask on, right? And that starts with, and it's really the basics. It starts with eat quality food, get some sleep, quality sleep, and drink lots of water.
And exercise.
And move. Right?
Move,
that's the 4 things. And truly, it is as simple as that. A physio that I used to see for a lower back issue, and he'd say, Kev, the more you move, the better you feel, the more you move. And it is absolutely true.
100%.
And so if you start doing those 4 things, right, then other things will start to come in. And the next thing after that, but it kind of starts first. It does start first, but it's easiest to say those physical things first. The next thing is then the mindset. Don't believe haters. Don't believe other shit that you see on social media. Don't believe glossy magazines. Don't believe everything is rosy in the world, because it's not. And that's okay. And the sooner you understand there's only 4 things in this world we can control, and that is our own thoughts, feelings, words and actions. We can't control anything else. We couldn't control that 15-year-old idiot on the bloody orange scooter who kept coming back every 3 minutes to annoy us. we can't control that, right? And if we get up and do something, well, you know, who knows where that's going to escalate to, right? And then we're in the wrong.
Exactly.
And there's no way that's going to happen. So there's only 4 things you can control. And let me tell you, when you realise and truly embrace, you can only control those 4 things, and everything else you can let it go. Man, that is liberating.
100%, mate.
And powerful.
It is powerful. It's liberating and powerful, and you get to take your power back, and it's pretty special. And mate, I know that, and we've spoken off air about that. And mate, it's been an absolute honour and a privilege to sit down with you, mate, and record your story and get those two different aspects of in the air and on the ground of Craig, and tying those 2 podcasts together. Mate, I want to thank you for your service to our country, and I want to thank you for the service that you went into with Care Flight afterwards in civilian. You're an absolute inspiration. You're a legend of a bloke, and I'm blessed to call you a mate. And mate, thank you for coming on True Blue Conversations and sharing your story. It's been an absolute ripper, and I've loved it. Thanks, mate.
Adam, thanks, buddy. Cheers.
Cheers.
Welcome, loyal listeners of True Blue Conversations. Today's episode is proudly sponsored by Australian Warfighter Coffee. Veteran owned and run, driven by a simple yet powerful motto: people over profit. Every dollar goes towards supporting veterans and first responder charity groups. Head on over to AustralianWarfighters.com and use the code TRUEBLUE for your exclusive discount. Because let's face it, any other coffee is just brown sadness water. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of True Blue Conversations with your host, Adam Bloom. See you on the front line.